G'day, mate. Luke Ford here. Want to move on to part 4 of my series, Decoding. The live streamer known as Destiny, his real name is Steve Bonnell, and he exercised his right of reply for Decoding the Gurus. He was recently analyzed on that show, and so he came back and talked to the host.
So I can either, pay for dinner, be engaged in the conversation, make her feel like she's safe around me, or I can slip, like Rufinol or whatever into her drink, and then when she's passed out, I could carry her off in my car, right? Like, both of these are achieving the same end, but obviously there's like a very ethical way to go about it. There's a highly unethical way to go about it. I think when it comes to like getting clicks, I think this is actually fundamentally, this goes really deeply into my philosophy. I think for a long time, the left made a big mistake in assuming that.
Okay, so let's be real here. Destiny gets clicks because he creates spectacle and he says outrageous, edgy, provocative things that you can't get away with in saying in real life, certainly not in workplace or in a polite environment. In fact, if you say many of the things that Destiny says to people to their face, you'll get punched. So Destiny, gives this edgy show, and even though his views are quite establishment, he says them in a way outside the establishment.
I'm not going to bore you with the jury instructions. It's a bunch of lawyers arguing over words like willful, unlawful, and intent. Important, sure. Yet, kind of like Bill Clinton once testifying, it depends on what the meaning of is. But there were huge headlines for two crucial developments before both sides in the hush money trial rested their case without testimony from Donald Trump and the defense calling just one major witness. Despite the litany of lies by Michael Cohen, lying to Congress, lying to investigators, lying to the press, all that was expected. The bombshell was this. The former fixer said under cross-examination that he was supposed to pay $50,000 to a contractor called Red Finch, hired to soften the impact of negative polls for Trump. Cohen testified that he gave the company's boss $20,000 in cash in a brown paper bag, not too suspicious, right? And kept the other $30,000. You stole from the Trump organization, right? A Trump lawyer asked. Yes, sir, Cohen replied. Even liberal commentators called this a devastating blow to Cohen's credibility, making him look like a greedy crook who'd loot money even from his ex-boss. The defense witness was Robert Costello, who represented Cohen for a few months. He says Cohen told him the former president knew nothing about the hush money reimbursement. And when Costello suggested Cohen might make a deal with federal prosecutors by bringing truthful information about the president, he says Cohen replied, I swear to God, nothing. Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. An obvious lie if he said that. But Costello so angered Judge Juan Merchan by muttering things like ridiculous and staring at the judge that he said, you don't give me side eye and you don't roll your eyes. Merchan was so upset that he cleared the courtroom, a bit of a debacle for the defense. Closing arguments are Tuesday with the media fixated on this question. What was the crime here? And did DA Alvin Bragg come close to proving it? I'm Howard Kurtz and this is Media Buzz.
Okay. All right, let's get back to Decoding Destiny. He exercised his right of reply and did this interview with the host of Decoding the Gurus a couple of days ago.
We're correct, so we don't have to package any of our stuff. We're just right. And the fact that we're...
Wait, where on earth does he get the idea that the left thought that never had to package its stuff? So, like many things that Destiny says, it's hard to see where it's rooted in reality. It sounds profound. So Destiny's... like Ben Shapiro says a lot of things that sound profound, and he speaks so rapidly, and he uses big words and big concepts at times that is quite, tempting to think that he's imparting something that's profound. But where on earth does he get the idea that the left never thought that it needed to package things attractively?
Right should be enough for people, and it is absolutely not enough for people.
And the fundamental flaw in this reasoning is the idea that we were born gullible, right? We did not evolve to be gullible. If we evolved to be gullible, right, we wouldn't exist, right? We would have died out in the evolutionary strategy for survival. So this idea that people, if they encounter attractive packaging, that they're just going to completely change their minds and go against their identity, go against their interests, is fallacious.
And for a long time, right-leaning content was just so much more human and entertaining than left-leaning content. I don't know if you guys ever listened to...
So this might be true with regard to live streaming, but Hassan Piker is pretty entertaining. But Destiny got into live streaming on political issues circa 2016, 2017. So in 2011, he quit his job as a carpet cleaner to stream video games full time. So he was born to a Cuban American mother and a white American father, raised in a conservative Catholic home. He went to a private Jesuit school. So Jean-Francois Garopi is obsessed with the idea that Destiny is Jewish, but there's no evidence that he was Jewish, right? He went to a Catholic school, quit his job as a carpet cleaner, stream video games full time. And starting in 2016, he gained attention for live streaming political debates with other internet personalities.
To talk radio in the United States. But man, if you slip between or flip between like NPR and then you listen to like Michael Savage, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, like these guys were passionate speakers. They were funny. They were angry. They channeled emotion. And then you go to like the most sterile laboratory speaking on like NPR, and it's just like, ugh, like it's just not entertaining at all. You know, it's funny if you ask like who was the most influential left-leaning educator, you know, for millennials, it was probably Jon Stewart, because he was funny, and that's really important. So when I talk about like needing to fight for clicks, I have to.
So some people put a priority on excitement and spectacle, and let's be honest, this is how Destiny has achieved prominence, because he has provided entertainment and spectacle. It's not from the depth of his political insights, right? I haven't heard people talking about great ideas that they learned from Destiny, but he gained attraction through fighting with people. He is rhetorically effective, and he creates spectacle.
To make my stuff like I have to be entertaining, like, and I hope I am entertaining. Like I read stuff, we study a lot. I try not to. I try to never. I don't believe you have to sacrifice the informational part or the educational part for the entertainment. I don't think that has to happen. I think you can make it funny. You just have to like make it human for people. You know, people understand this intuitively when it comes to like classrooms, right? Like nobody would say that I had a really boring teacher, but I had this amazing teacher that got me so interested in a topic, and then say, yeah, but he was an amazing teacher because he misrepresented so much and just made it entertaining. It was no, he made like the facts interesting to you because he was entertaining. He was like so good at that. And that's kind of what I try to do. So like when I say like I need clicks, I can't like afford to just sit on stream for 8 hours and just read a book out loud to my audience. There's going to have to be other types of content that I interweave or other ways that I comment on.
Wait, was he taking a dig at me there?
Or argue with people over it that makes them like more drawn into it. And then hopefully as part of that educational or entertainment process, they're also like becoming more informed on the facts as well.
What's the most unethical ways you've seen? What's the worst and most common things?
You mean like in terms of like getting a fan base? Or
yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess the things that people do, perhaps mostly motivated by just wanting to get a lot of clicks and be popular. Like what does it incentivize them to do?
Well, yeah, so I guess in my world, the things that you're looking for are things like so like there's a concept called audience capture where,
well, the easiest way to get clicks is to focus on personalities and to have some sort of interactions or discussions of people who get more clicks than you. So by virtue of doing a show on Destiny, I'm highly likely to get 4 times the number of ordinary views that I would typically get for a video. So typically put on a video on YouTube and typically get 300 or 400 views. If I do a video on Destiny, all right, it's going to get 2,000 views.
if you've got a particular audience and wants to hear a particular thing, that's the thing that you're more likely to feed them. And you're not doing that out of any principled obligation to a thing. You're doing it because you know that there's a big reward there. So people that co-sign others' opinions, or people that form alliances with certain communities, or people that carry water for certain people just because they know it'll get them clicks, or people that this gets more into the sterile, like, I don't know, prop logic or philosophy analysis, but like people that engage in like bad argumentation. So when somebody's willing to make really strong claims with really high levels of conviction about things that they have no research about or no evidence of, but they know there's a big social reward for them. Like, I think that these are probably some of the worst things driving online content today, depending on the circle you're in. Do you know who Ryan Long is? And they do the boys.
So what would you guess is the average IQ for Destiny's audience? So I'd put it at about 100, right up there with Nick Fuentes. As opposed to Jean-Francois Garopi, I'd suspect that the average IQ of his audience is 110 to 115. Dennis Prager's audience is probably about 100. Tucker Carlson's audience used to be 105, has probably dropped down to 100 now.
Cast. It's Ryan Long and another guy.
I know them.
So if I get a Twitter DM or an email with regard to this show, the odds are about 25% that comes from a university professor. So I'd estimate the average IQ of my audience is around 130. because out of all the different academic disciplines who contact me with regard to this show, I most often hear from philosophers. I've heard from philosophers at the most prestigious universities in the world. So when you create a show that is aimed at a target audience, average IQ 130, all right, you've got a much smaller section of the pie. All right, you're talking about 2% of the American population is your potential audience, as opposed to when you do a show aimed at a 100 IQ audience, right? You're talking about approximately 60% of the American population is your potential audience.
You know the guys that did the woke people are like far right people. That little Nazis,
yeah, those
little
guys.
skit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first time I went on their show, I think I was getting a lot of attention relating to the Rittenhouse stuff because I felt really strongly that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, and their audience loved me. And they said I was like the most reasonable liberal anywhere. They were really appreciative of like the perspective that I brought, and they, you know, really just liked the fact that I was a reasonable liberal. The last time I was on the show, I was highly critical of Donald Trump, and they fucking hated me. It was so much. I don't know. I don't know if you saw any comments, but oh my God, it was like brutal. But like that idea of like, one thing I could do, there are ways where when I talk to certain people, I could only show certain opinions. And I know that would garner me a whole bunch more like clicks and respect and desirability from those communities. And there are certain topics that I know I could stay away from that wouldn't get me in as much heat with different communities. And when I see people making decisions like that, like people are just molding themselves to the audience rather than trying to guide the audience to some better place. And I don't like that. I think that's incredibly damaging.
And is Destiny really guiding his audience to a better place rather than being molded by his audience? From the little I know about Destiny, he seems to overwhelmingly provide people with the drama, the spectacle, and the edgy, outrageous, hyperbolic overstatements that people crave, and they find it easiest to come to a live stream for some sort of intense, visceral reaction. And he strikes me as having essentially molded himself to his audience. Right here is Destiny commenting on Jean-Francois.
There's one and there's a second but we won't watch more. But yeah, holy shit. So it seems like people are theorizing that the two leading Twitter / Kiwi Farms theories are that he killed his wife at the house and then dumped her body somewhere, or that he just took her out to the woods and either killed her or just like dropped her off to let her wander around until she basically died. If she truly is so developmentally delayed that she's like at the developmental level of a 10-year-old, then yeah, dropping her off in the woods somewhere would be effectively killing her. But Jesus, how popular is this guy? Not very.
So Destiny went on Andy Warski's show back in December 28, 2017 to debate with JF.
About this.
Yeah, I guess if we want to hop into that. So my main problem with this kind of stuff is you've got normative claims and you've got descriptive claims, right? So on the descriptive side of things, you describe scientific fact, right? Like the house is blue, right? And then on the normative side of things, you have what we ought to do with the house, right? So let's say the house is blue, so we should destroy it, right? The normative claim that we should destroy it is a claim of what we ought to do with it, and then the descriptive claim is that the house is blue. The problem that I have with people, especially JF, is that it seems like what happens is we get a whole bunch of really toxic normative claims that are built off of descriptive claims. So for instance, there are people that believe that race is real. There is a huge difference in IQ between black people and white people. Therefore, people like Terry McCarthy or the alt-hype will say things like, we need a white ethno-state of the US. We need to get rid of all of the brown people. And then when people challenge these kinds of assertions, these normative assertions, people like JF will show up and they'll defend the descriptive claim without really commenting on the normative. JF will show up and he'll say, oh, well, the science is kind of correct. Or, in some ways he's kind of correct that race is real. But then they never like make any kind of comment on the normative side of things. That's my pretty big problem with it, yeah.
Well, not commenting on the normative side of things, that doesn't seem to be a devastating critique of a perspective.
Yeah, you were saying that the main issue you have is now people are starting to say race is real, therefore, and then the extreme right will start saying things like maybe we should, remove a certain race out of certain areas to, better the society that we're living in. And that's something you obviously have a problem with. And
these sort of problems between groups, between religious groups and racial groups, because different groups are going to have different levels of crime. They're going to have different gifts. They're going to have contributions to society. And so many of these problems could be ameliorated with something like a vouch system. where to enter certain neighborhoods, you have to have 10, 20, 40, 50 adults without a criminal record who vouch for you and are therefore on the hook for your behavior. Right? To get a driver's license, you have to have, say, at least 10 adults without a criminal record who vouch for you. To own a gun, you have to have, let's say, 30 adults without a criminal record who vouch for you. Right? If we had this kind of vouch system, right, we would be able to significantly reduce these intergroup tensions.
I want to say right now, like for people who are watching who may be alt-right or whatever, while I believe race is real, I am saying in no way that we should judge someone based on averages, based on what we think their IQ might be. We should treat everyone as an individual, because it's just inhumane, in my opinion, to take an average and then fucking banish people because of
this. You hear this idea just promoted all the time by people from Charles Murray to the great intellectual Andy Warski, that we should judge people as individuals. That's way too tiring. We simply don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the cognitive processing power to judge everyone as an individual, right? That is something that we reserve for the people who are closest to us, who are particularly important to us, and therefore we're willing to remove them from their primary group identity and judge them as individuals. But when we go through life, we judge people in terms of groups, whether they are doctors, lawyers, accountants, whether they are black, white, Asian, Latino, whether they are American, Nigerian, Australian, Japanese, whether they are gay or straight. We put people into broad categories because that saves us on cognitive processing. And it's a heuristic that serves us. All right, heuristic is an approximation. Right? It's not something that results in 100% accuracy, but it is a useful approximation. And the reason that people stereotype is because stereotypes have significant validity.
So-and-so. And I just think that's fucked up, in my opinion.
So I'm kind of curious.
It's absolutely impossible to treat everyone as an individual. We just don't have the bandwidth.
Just when you say that, just based on your conversations, when you say race is real, can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah. Well, looking at all the different races, there are a lot of differences within all the races, such as bone structure. Certain races being more intelligent. Sorry, what?
With black people, I mean, they have a higher increased chance of having sickle cell anemia.
So that's not. But so even that's not necessarily true.
That's a genetic difference in a race.
But that's not. I mean, so well, firstly, that's not necessarily true. So the sickle cell anemia. So that particular thing that you're talking about is really only impactful to blacks that lived in the sub-Saharan region. It was like a response developed to malaria. So there are plenty of black people that don't have that innate defense, or I'm sorry, that innate vulnerability.
But as an average, that will show that is a common.
Yeah, sure. But this is the problem, right? Is that I could show you a white person that would have this trait, and I could show you a black person that doesn't have this trait. So what is the usefulness in saying black people?
That is such a moronic argument, all right, to argue from anecdote that you can find one exception and that somehow destroys a generalization.
People have this thing and white people don't.
Well, I think we're talking about averages and the probability, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's always an exception to some sort of rule. I mean, some of those developments are environmental, but they're,
yeah. So
there are genetic differences.
Yeah, so you can find some genetic differences. I guess my only question is what is the value in recognizing this difference, right? Like in a hospital, you would never.
Okay, nature color codes all the time, right? People, animals signal, right? We have different colors in nature that reflect different things in different environments, and so one of the most primal human needs is to know who's likely to be hostile to us and who's likely to be a friend. And one component of people figuring out whether or not someone's likely to be on their side or to be a threat to them is race, along with religion and other signals.
Say oh, well, he's black, therefore this. You would do some sort of sequencing, or you would take a test to find out, what the exact answer is. You would never classify people in this way, right? And then there are differences we have.
Of course, we classify people in broad stereotypes. It's a heuristic, all right? We recognize that, for example, Jews have below average levels of criminal violence. Other groups have above average levels of criminal violence. Asians have below average levels of criminal violence. People from Northeast Asia seem to drive more carefully and to conduct their life more carefully than do people of European origins.
For instance, blood type. Do you think that people of blood type A should be a different race than people of blood type B, or people AB or people O? Would you classify these people as different races? Sure, there could be differences, but is there any value in grouping them as entirely different subspecies or races of?
Is there any value in deciding what blood type someone is? Yeah, if you have to give them a blood transfusion, right? If you are treating people as a doctor, right, you are committing malpractice if you don't racially stereotype them, if you don't identify them by race, because different races have different susceptibilities to different diseases, all right? That different readings on different tests, all right, mean different things, whether it's for black people or for white people or for Asian people. Right, certain drugs work better for some races than for other races. So the idea that you're brought into the ER, let's say you've been shot, you're passed out, you're unconscious, they have to give you a blood transfusion, your life depends on it. Yeah, knowing what your blood type is vital. On the other hand, trying to figure out how someone's going to vote, I don't know if there's much predictive value in knowing someone's blood type.
People?
Well, the answer to whether there is value in grouping people, the answer is quite simple, is if my prediction is better than random following my grouping, then my grouping provides some information. I don't think that...
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's better than random, then it provides some information. So this is Jean-Francois Garapi's show. May 22nd, he devotes large parts of 3 shows to attack Steve Saylor.
The race statistics and all. So that's how I just got to know that there he was making race statistics and criminology talking points about race. But today he commits an error, and there are when you commit certain errors, you can see that someone is not thinking in evolutionary terms. You can see that someone is not thinking in racial terms, and you can see that someone ultimately has ingested the boomer propaganda of the eternal malleability of the mind, and everything is fixable, and if we could only have...
So he's talking about Steve Saylor, but he obviously knows nothing with regard to what he's saying. The idea that Steve Saylor stands for everything is fixable is absurd. That the mind is just infinitely malleable, again, absurd. Right? Completely contrary to Steve Saylor's written, published opinions for 30 years.
Equality. We could fix people's problems. We could bring intelligence up. Now,
so what makes Jean-Francois Garapi a compelling live streamer is he absolutely no problem with pronouncing with tremendous confidence on things that he knows nothing about. So he did a show with Kevin McDonald, and he titled the show "The Critique Stands," and he says, Kevin McDonald, yeah, your theory stands up to the criticism by Nathan Koftis. The only thing is you need to drop the group component of group evolutionary strategy. But that's the whole basis of Kevin McDonald's critique, is the group component. So Jean-Francois is perfectly willing to do a whole show saying that a critique stands that he doesn't understand at all, right? He will make the most assured pronouncements without having a clue with regard to what he's discussing. Now, that's entertaining, and it's viscerally compelling to watch someone doing this, but it certainly doesn't add to your knowledge of the world.
In a guy like this, who claims to be a right-winger of some sort, a Republican, it won't show...
Who claims to be a right-winger, some boomer, some Republican. He's the most influential public intellectual in the last 30 years, Steve Saylor.
As explicitly as I just stated it, but the underlying set of beliefs that I see in Steve Saylor, as he argues, are the beliefs of Jewry, are the beliefs of boomerism, are the beliefs of liberalism. So sometimes you have to acknowledge that. Sometimes you have to acknowledge that your leaders have not integrated the proper framework mentally to be carrying racial ideas forward. And you know, he's a late guy in this field. I read that originally
he doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. All right, Steve Saylor has been publishing on matters of race for 30 years, right? He published several essays that are still influential, still discussed in National Review back in the 1990s.
He was having a blog and arguing for a path for a Trump-like candidate back in the 2000s, as far back as the 2000s. So basically someone who would kind of recruit the white vote without necessarily identifying explicitly as white. That tells me this is the sign of someone who treats race from a very pragmatic perspective.
Oh my God, treating something from a pragmatic perspective. So that's a bad thing. What Steve Saylor was saying, the Steve Saylor strategy is that Republicans should hunt for votes where the votes are. And Republicans are much more likely to obtain support from white Americans than from non-white Americans.
Rather than a biological one. And I'll show you where his error is and why it matters. It really matters because just by claiming that his conclusion is incorrect, I have lifted a bunch of dirt on the public space because his fans are arguing very poorly in my reply section. He is arguing extremely poorly and revealing himself ultimately to be part of this whole recently exposed circle because, you know, there was this Lomas thing, the guy that got doxxed who was basically publishing.
So a little later in this show, JF says that Jews never prioritize the truth, that Jews are never willing to follow principles into the abyss. It just absurd levels of insanity from this guy.
Books, and it was all a circle, as noted by Nick Fuentes, a circle of 40-plus-year-old Jews, academics, and they always gather in bunches of 4 or 5. They always do these gay ups. It's kraut and tea all over again.
Okay, so kraut and tea refers to someone in Europe who I don't believe was Jewish, who was intent on doxing people who talked about race realism. So very opposite of a Steve Saylor or a Lomas type. So Lomas is Steve Saylor's publisher. So Nick Fuentes writes, I don't know anything about Lomas other than, right, this is typical of Nick Fuentes. I don't know anything, but that he is part of the Curtis Yarvin Peter Thiel network and publishes its authors in a magazine. Right, he's a book publisher. There is a clear pattern of anon accounts in that network who all seem to be 35-year-old Jews in academia who never talk about Jewish influence. And Nathan Kofnes responds, when you see something interesting, successful, and not anti-Semitic, there's often a 35-year-old Jewish academic behind it. But when you see a loudmouth anti-Semite leading his moron followers down a path to nowhere, he is slightly less likely to be a Jew. So what's going on with Steve Saylor's Twitter feed? So he points out the last 4 years of the George Floyd Black Lives Matter racial reckoning got a vast number of black lives murdered, ought now to be obvious, but the explosion in black traffic fatalities due to depolicing after George Floyd's death on May 25, 2020 is more striking. So, yeah, look at this enormous increase in homicides of black people and deaths in motor vehicles of black people since the death of George Floyd. Charles Murray tweets, withholding access to data unless people agree to stringent restrictions on what they can study is impeding a broad swath of inquiries that go far beyond race and IQ. It's a scandal. The war on noticing in modern Britain. Steve Saylor is retweeting. And then Aaron Siberium writes for the Washington Free Beacon. He released a devastating report this past week that 50% of first-year UCLA medical students cannot pass elementary competency standards. Charles Murray tweets, UCLA's medical school can easily refute the criticisms if they are false. Just release the data disproving them. The information exists in its files. Just show the world. Then Aaron, the journalist, says they will argue that releasing such anonymized data would compromise the privacy of individual students, even though by that logic, they are already violating the privacy of minority students by making positive claims about their performance. See Penn's response to Amy Wax. So Amy Wax noted that the black students in her classes were not in the top 50% of performers, and University Penn said that's not true, but they didn't provide any data. Right? There are well-established ways to protect privacy in such situations, such as not releasing specific data involving fewer than 10 individuals. If UCLA Medical School refuses to release data, it's proof of guilt. We got PGA Tour Grayson Murray died at age 30. And cue the anti-vax idiots in the replies. Eventually, Willie Mays, born in 1939, will drop dead from the COVID vax. One thing I noticed when Saturday Night Live had Bob Dole on after his 1996 defeat to interact with his imitator Norm Macdonald was that Dole had a much deeper, richer speaking voice than even a comic genius like Norm Macdonald. So Bob Dole, under modern conditions, would have been a great improv comic, but his heroism in World War II pushed him into a political career, which he did remarkably well despite having few managerial skills. Since Elon Musk took over Twitter, Steve Saylor notes, I've been adding about 110 additional followers per day. Noticing, where does that term come from? It's the name of Steve Saylor's new book. It's a common English word that's been used at least 20 times since 1994 in major publications. Around 2002, I started using it as a motto from George Orwell: to see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. A lot of people have a hard time understanding the effects of rescaling on group differences and the interpretations of group scores. Lots of people use misscaling to mislead people. And Steve Saylor says, it seems like a small percentage of the population have internalized how bell curves work, so these kind of ploys are transparent for them. But for the great majority, bell curves are opaque esoterica. And I've been listening to Richard Ben Cramer's classic book, What It Takes, regarding the 1988 American presidential campaign. Like, I've been letting it just run all night because I've already read it, so it's not too exciting to keep me awake. And Steve Saylor says, Bob Dole's is the most memorable story of the 6 presidential candidates in Richard Ben Cramer's classic book, What It Takes. Does anybody have a table of net prices of colleges after financial aid? My impression is most private colleges have similar prices. Less elite colleges discount less than do rich ones. But protests and affordability at private universities, we see that the higher the tuition at a university, all right, the more likely you are to have protests, as opposed to a working class college where students who are working and, say, taking care of a family just don't have the time to participate in campus protests. Are there any reliable stats on how safe Mexican tourism destinations are? I used to go to Mexico all the time. By 1996, it was obvious that cocaine, money, and dumb guys with huge guns were all over the place, so I lost interest. Yeah, I have not gone back to Mexico since about 1980. And then Steve Saylor's been interacting with a bunch of Nick Fuentes, Jean-Francois Garapi fans who dispute that there was ever a Holocaust. And Steve Saylor notes that the Holocaust is about the most documented mass genocide that we have, extensively documented. All right, let's play a little bit more here from JF.
They organize on some Discord and we're going to subvert.
The idea that Steve Saylor is participating in some Discord to try to subvert the Goyim is absurd.
The entirety of the right wing. Gay ops after gay ops, and I'm afraid to think that Steve Saylor, as being part of this nuclear...
Look, there's nothing wrong with using terms like gay ops or whatever slur you want to use if you can then back it up with several examples. But you'll notice that JF throws out these huge generalizations, but he never backs them up with any substance. He doesn't back them up with empirical examples.
Of Jewish academics that was recently exposed, if you will, doxed, that he's getting nervous, and that his nervousness is leading him to commit mistakes that are just objective mistakes of evolutionary thinking. We will get to this. How are you doing, people of the regular chat? MI5 Surveillance has sent $10. Thank you so much for supporting the show. He says, regarding your opening comments recently on not turning a blind eye to petty crime because perpetrators of such crimes rarely go on to big things. Jim Goad. Okay, may not be big things, but he's making notable contributions, albeit in a way that dissents from the norm. I have one thing to say to Jim Goad. Fuck him. I do not care. I consider him a lesser being of the universe. Fuck him.
So JF takes things awfully personally. So he may share a worldview with Jim Goad that is pretty similar 99% of the time, but because Jim Goad used certain words during his appearance on JF's show, JF just wants to damn him to hell.
Fuck his friends, fuck his family, fuck his entire existence. You are choosing the worst possible example if you want to convince me that rehabilitation is valuable, because if I could arbitrarily do it, if I was the dictator of America, I would take Jim Goad and put him back in jail forever just for being a stupid fuck. Fuck Jim Goad. You are really not falling into a good example for me, because Jim Goad, some people might remember on the regular chat, came on my show as a guest. I invited him on my show, and what did he do? he came knowingly used words that were against the YouTube rules just to get me banned, just because he's a stupid.
So Jim Goad is probably low in agreeableness, right? It doesn't make him a bad person, doesn't make him stupid, right? He's just low in the personality trait of agreeableness.
Angry man with an absolute lack of self-control. So no, he is not an example of rehabilitation. To the contrary, he's an example that there's something deeply rotten. When you end up having to be put in jail by society, there's something deeply rotten about you, and there's something deeply rotten about Jim Goad. Spirits Inside has sent $12. Thank you so much. He says, was Adolf Hitler a criminal and mass murderer? Signals that have evolved for men and women for 7 million years. I'm just going to mix them up in some perfect equilibrium so that you don't know what I am. You have to be insane to want to do this. Boiling Frog says, that's why women support the trans thing, because they love mixed signals. Exactly. That's one thing that women love. So let's
So has JF just dramatically gone down market, started appealing to the worst in people, lowered the average IQ of the audience that his show is directed at in the last 5 years? I mean, that's certainly my impression. I mean, was JF this bad in early 2018? I don't remember that.
Start with the Steve Saylor issue here. And this is the sad thing, which is there is no such thing as a race realist with whom I can agree. I mean, there's the Nick Fuentes that.
And why is that? Because JF has to be special, right? He regards himself as the superstar. And so he's a little like Richard Spencer in this capacity, that he cannot concede that there's anyone else who is as, important and intellectual as himself.
That I generally agree with most things. Back in the days, there was the all type. But unfortunately, there is not a school of thought of race realism that is truly filled with genuine thinkers, genuine evolutionary thinkers. And whenever I have other people talk about the field of race realism, or whenever I have an Elon Musk retweet.
I mean, there are all these dozens of people who devoted their life to studying genetics and to studying human evolution. And the idea that none of them are great thinkers, that they're all surpassed by Jean-Francois Garapi, is absurd.
People. It always turns out to be people that I find have a deep weakness. And Steve Saylor shows his weakness today.
Yeah, let's scroll through Steve Saylor's Twitter feed. Retweets, Karl Popper spent a fair bit of time in the 1970s working his way through Theodore Adorno and Habermas. His conclusion, critical theory is a pile of word games and pretentious nonsense. Stereotype accuracy. Yes, stereotypes tend to be pretty accurate. There was little desire to immigrate to the U.S. after the stock market crash of 1929. Anti-Nazis like the Nabokovs wanted to immigrate from Berlin to Paris in 1936 to 37. The fall of France in 1940 came as a world historical shock. Mid-century immigrants to America tended not to be romantic heroes of romantic legend, instead tended to have their eyes on the main chance. A few were interested in coming to Depression America from the stock market crash in 1929 to the fall of France in 1940. Have you noticed how extraordinarily united Americans, including Germans, Italians, and Japanese, were during World War II? It's almost as if founding stock Americans asserting their leadership priority in 1924 caused immigrants to gracefully fall in line with world historical benefits. Yes, there was major immigration restriction passed in 1924, and as a result, America from 1924 to the mid-1960s was at its most united, had the most social cohesion and social trust. And Steve Saylor notes, the prose style of Marx and Engels, the Communist Manifesto, is sensationally good. And Steve Saylor talks about intelligence gaps between groups, probably the most exhaustively documented findings all of U.S. social science. What causes it? Nature, nurture, or both? Probably both. Holocaust deniers assume both that the Holocaust is tediously overdocumented and that it is undocumented. Republican stands up for prisoner rights, arguing that female convicts shouldn't be exposed to rape by their male cellmates. Some good points here.
In your court, what matters more, the rights of individuals or your political ideology?
I apply the law to the facts.
I asked a question, which matters more?
Well, my political ideology doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so I don't believe you. And I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology. This case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. Was he guilty of that?
Yes, the petitioner pled guilty to that.
Okay, so he raped a 9-year-old boy. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. Was he guilty of that?
He pled guilty. The petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted of distributing child pornography.
Child pornography that was images of adults violently raping children.
Abhorrent conduct.
Okay.
For which there are real victims.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago, you said that when this man decided that he was a she, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. That phrase struck me as remarkable. Did this individual have male genitalia?
I think what I said, or at least what
that is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial rapist, serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, you know, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're asking me?
Yes, the other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Okay, some good points there by Ted Cruz. But Destiny talks to the host of Decoding the Gurus.
And I think it's also incredibly damaging, even more so because they present themselves as doing something different, right? Like if Project Veritas was called Project Partisan, I'd have no problem with what they do, right? Okay, yeah, you guys just like you push a certain political opinion, that's fine. But it's annoying when all these fuckers, try to operate under the aesthetic of truth and logic and reason. And it's like, okay, well, Jesus Christ, like you haven't even read these indictments that you've talked about for 3 months. Or
yeah, so Destiny's talking here about the glories of truth and reason. And his argument against stereotypes was that what if you find one exception, right? What if you find one white person with sickle cell anemia and one black person who doesn't have sickle cell anemia? Then does that not blow up the stereotype that certain black people are particularly susceptible to sickle cell anemia?
Or you're supposed to be educated in this particular thing. You haven't even read this like paper that everybody's talking about. Like, how do you have any information on this? Like, clearly your commitment to logic and reason aren't there. You're just like farming an audience for clicks and destroying the discourse while you're doing so.
I'm gonna give you credit, Stephen, as well. That one thing that I find very annoying, especially in the context that we look at, is like with someone like Jordan Peterson or discussing with Sam Harris, there is the whole thing that you encountered with Jordan Peterson that you've talked about, the constellation of right-wing, like kind of global warming is conspiracy concocted by the WEF and Trump was, the voting machines, maybe they weren't tampered with, but there was all of it kind of connects in together. But you could have a conversation with Jordan Peterson where you veer away from those topics and you mainly talk about polarization and talk about, the psychological issues with liberals.
There's nothing dishonorable about doing a show where you emphasize topics they have in common, right? You don't have to fight with people or bring up your differences to have a valuable show.
And it would go very smoothly, right? Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of people do that. And I think
there's a lot of value to having a smooth show. And then there's often value to having a confrontational show. It's not like value is only to be found in doing one type of interview.
Your credit that you often are willing not to do that, as demonstrated recently with Jordan.
Some people are higher in the personality trait of agreeableness than others. I would expect that Destiny is quite low in the personality trait of agreeableness. So having confrontations with people is his path to clicks and plays to his strengths as a highly intelligent debater. But it doesn't mean that he's necessarily putting out a superior product.
Good effect. But even though he then regarded you as like, you know,
Too argumentative.
too argumentative. But what you talked about in regards, you know, the left being more effective at making its content entertaining or like rhetorically effective, right, and engaging. Isn't there the issue that if you optimize for that you create Hassan and BreadTube, like where you just get a flip side where there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of like strong personalities and, you know, demonizing outgroups, and that kind of...
Well, you're following the dictates of capitalism if you do that, right? If you give the audience what it wants, right, you are following the market, and as long as what you're doing is legal, then I don't have a huge argument against it. I don't respect it necessarily.
Appeal in the same way and package a message effectively, whereas, you know, if you are in a sense advocating for something which is more moderate, it's ultimately going to be more boring in a sense, because you're not saying there's going to be a revolution. You're not saying...
So one thing that a live streamer should ask is, what are you optimizing for? Or a talk show host, what do you optimize for? So for the most successful live streamers and podcast hosts and talk show hosts, right, they optimize for a compelling quality. All right, interesting is where the money is. It's not in truth, right? It's not in honesty. It's not in being pro-social. It's being provocative and compelling and interesting. So I strive to optimize for truth, right? As a result, my show is less compelling. I strive to optimize for being pro-social. As a result, 99% of the people who want to come on the show, I don't want them on the show because I don't think that appearing on my show will be good for them and good for the audience. My show used to have a train wreck quality, right? People used to come on and say, you know, crazy and compelling things, often when they were drunk. And it made for compelling entertainment, but it wasn't necessarily in either their best interests or in our best interests.
Saying that, you know, there is a savior who's going to come and there'll be a utopia and that you all get to be revolutionaries. You're saying you get to make incremental changes through like legislation over successive administrations. Like, is that a sexy message, or do you have to inject like, you know, drama and stuff in?
So notice how we talked about you get to improve life through passing incremental legislation. This is typical of a left-wing perspective, that it's by passing government laws that are ultimately enforced by police with the threat of putting people in prison. That's how you make society better. And sometimes that makes people better. Sometimes it makes society better for some people and worse for other people. But this is the default left-wing assumption that progress is made through passing legislation.
In order to make people pay attention to that.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, there's the personal aspect. So on presentation, you can be more entertaining, which I think is a big...
Right, you can make society better through all sorts of things. You can have a swing towards more national cohesion, right? By limiting immigration in 1924, the United States of America was more cohesive, had more trust, had more unity between 1924 and 1964 than probably ever before in its history. And so, yeah, I guess that's one piece of legislation that can have massive effects. But also, there are other ways to change things. A religious and moral revival can change things. You can have cutting-edge research that shows people more effective ways at decoding reality or life. You can have a return to marriage and children. All right, the idea that it's only through government legislation that you can improve things strikes me as inadequate.
That's technically where I cut my teeth, was being like the only guy on the left that would debate crazily with people on the right. I'll call people names, we'll scream at each other, we're rolling on the mud. And traditionally online, like lefty people.
Okay, there's no social value in what he describes, right? He's presenting that as, you know, something honorable and valuable. That's absurd.
Or SJWs, we called them back then before woke became popular, were just kind of like pussies. They weren't willing to like get in the mud and fight with these people. So that's where I kind of got my initial burst of popularity from. So you can be like entertaining in terms of presentation. When you talk about actual content, this is I think a really weak area of mine that I've been trying to improve a lot. Especially I had a conversation with an online content creator called JJ McCullough. And he does like politics from Canada, basically. But one thing that I've had a lot of trouble with is I think because I'm such the way that I approach life and the way that I look at things is incredibly discreetly. I'm just not like a narrativized kind of person, like on a personal level. Like if somebody asks me a question about a thing, like I'm like, okay, well, what's like the percentage of this? Or like, what's like, that's just how my mind is like working. And in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad, especially when talking to other people. But when I come online, I have my intellectual demeanor is to just nitpick endlessly. So if somebody gives me like, well, these are all the reasons why I like Donald Trump. And it's like, oh, really? Well, what can you say about his legislation? Oh, jack shit. Oh, he did deficit spending. Oh, fuck you. Oh, his foreign policy sucked. You're retarded. Like, I'll just say like, I'll go on these things. And at the end of the day, it can be good rhetorically in some ways in that, well, hopefully I make the other person look bad. Or
yeah, he can make people look bad, but it's not exactly adding clarity or depth.
Or make him look dumb, or his fans feel like embarrassed that he couldn't respond to these things, etc. Oh, whatever. But also something that's missing from a lot of what I argue that I've been trying to add more is you really do need a constructive argument for people to grow.
Yeah, Elliot Blatt makes a great point. Repealing a lot of legislation, such as the Civil Rights Acts, would dramatically improve America, restore the prime value of our Constitution, right to the freedom of association, freedom to hire who you want, to rent to who you want, return the right to private property and to be able to lend it out or to lease it out as you see fit.
Grapple with for people to like latch onto. Like Andrew Tate and all of these guys became popular because they center this locus of control on you that makes you feel like you are your own person that can, grab life by the horns and like have a strong influence on your own destiny. Like, oh, like when I listen to
Is that why Andrew Tate became popular? Because he emphasized having a strong locus of control? That strikes me as absolutely absurd. Andrew Tate became popular because he is a compelling personality for people with moderate IQs. Right? I don't think people with IQs above 120 find his ideas compelling, but a lot of people in the 90 to 105 IQ realm find him a compelling personality. So this idea that because he was putting out a message of take control of your life, that accounts for his popularity. There are thousands of people putting out a similar message who aren't nearly as successful as Andrew Tate. His popularity does not come from that message.
People on the left, they tell me that white supremacist structures mean I can't take credit for a single thing that I do. And, all of my ancestors were imperialists and I'm, an asshole. But when I listen to Andrew,
are there any prominent thinkers on the left who tell people you can't take credit for any single thing you do? This is just a straw man. Destiny is just inventing this caricature that doesn't exist.
Tate, he's telling me that, all these people are against me, the feminists and all these woke tards and, the IMF and everybody else, but I have the ability to go to the gym and I can.
Yeah, both sides emphasize victimhood because that's a very fast way to create compelling content, right? If you get people excited, you get people angry, you get people aroused, right? Then you're much more likely to connect with them.
Buy a sword and walk around my apartment and feel like I can fight the world. And I'm able to, join the man's club or whatever the fuck they have and like take it and sell crypto and do all this, right? Those people are really empowering because they give you something to latch onto and they make it feel like you're moving towards something like larger, transcendental.
Yeah, there is an empowering element to that message, but it's always combined with the elites are out to get you, society's out to get you, or all our leading institutions are out to get you. So the net effect from what I've seen seems to be far more disempowering because you're telling people that the whole system is rigged against them. How empowering a message is that?
And that's I don't think you have to be presenting bullshit to do it. I just need to do a better job at presenting that, which I've been trying to do more as I hone in on in my last debate, I try to point this out now a lot. This country is so cool. America, well, maybe not to you guys because you guys are in not America, but for me, it's America.
All right.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, like I did a debate on Fresh and Fit where we're talking about like, is Islam like, should it be the best religion or some bullshit? And I'm like, I just want to point out that we've got like a Sudanese immigrant. I've got this guy from I think the Middle East. I've got you who I don't even know where you're from, and my mom's like a Cuban immigrant. And like all of us are here having this conversation with no worry about the police, no worry about anything else. You guys are making money in a capitalist environment. All of this is happening in the USA, in the United States of America, not under some crazy totalitarian regime, not in a place where women can't vote, not in a place where there's a mandated whatever bullshit, but like with all the freedom.
So there is a Reddit devoted to decoding the gurus, and there was some sharp comments on it about Destiny, that Destiny is a paradox. He champions a pro-institution, establishment, liberal political worldview, but the popularity that he's developed comes from advocating the exact opposite of that worldview, right? His popularity mostly comes from his ability to be abrasive, vulgar, edgy, with a penchant for vindictiveness. Right? That's how he got his popularity during his StarCraft video gaming days, and those characteristics get incorporated into his political debate content. Right? His popularity comes from his live streaming media, the opposite of an institution with checks and balances. Right? His media start began on the Justin.tv platform, which had an even lower bar for entry than Twitch, sort of like the modern day Wild West version of AM shock jock radio, which prioritizes quantity and shock over quality. Destiny's content, by its very nature, is performative with huge doses of spectacle. Yeah, his content is a performance for a moderate, 100 IQ crowd, right? And this is the exact opposite of the institutions that Destiny praises, right? No one at the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Treasury Department, or other departments is getting picked by how well they can shit talk enemies in a verbal battle, right? They're getting picked for being quiet professionals who are good at their job. And after a rigorous vetting process, right, a high bar for entry, they're picked not for their performative abilities, but for their penchant for keeping important policies out of the way of public controversy and division. So Destiny gets his audience by playing up and creating division. Right? Destiny is all about adversarial spectacle, sometimes touching on important political issues. Right? He distracts from the important issues, the important considerations of issues, and instead draws attention to toxic ways of fighting online. Now, this might contribute to more political engagement online, but also fosters a more toxic political engagement. And a perfect example of this would be Destiny's engagement on the Israel-Palestine conflict, where he joked about how Israel should commit genocide against the Palestinians. His content is like if someone combined Obama's nuanced institutional political views with Trump's unnuanced populist rhetorical practices. Right? The latter cultivates a toxic fan base, regardless of how politically sound it might be. As much as Trump supporters might say they support Trump for his policies, that's false. One can easily tell because there are at least a dozen other Republican candidates who have the same policies as Trump. The only difference between those candidates and Trump is that he is famous and he has a propensity to engage in invective. He possesses a combative personality, right? His personality is the focus rather than the political issues. So Destiny, similarly, he makes his personality the focus, not the issues, right? He's not known for his well-researched arguments nearly as much as for his ability to go low in a debate. Like he gets into all sorts of fiery debates with experts and non-experts alike. He's looking for online people to vanquish in a match. Destiny says the problem with online lefties is that they believe there are no wrong tactics, only wrong political targets. Destiny ought to be held to his own standard, in spite of being right politically. Right? This criticism is coming from someone center left. He deserves criticism for contributing to a toxic discourse by hurling invectives at opponents and engaging in unhinged rhetoric. He has had many years to settle down his rhetoric, but the popularity of the spectacles he creates is undeniable, right? And let's be real, Destiny cultivates an obscenely low level quality of discussion. Right? He wants to get a wide audience, and so he is edgy, and he's happy to take the conversation into the toilet. Right? He's not trying to capture an audience with a disposition towards truth-seeking. Instead, he opts for a more aggressive and confrontational and performative, edgy approach. Right? Sometimes, yeah, he genuinely tries to become informed, but this is not the type of content that sells. Right? he faces the perverse incentives and he admits that he plays into it, and that's to be nasty online.
And liberal things that we can enjoy here. So yeah, that's like a weakness of mine. I need to do a better job at being constructive, and I've been trying to get better at that. But I think you can do it without being sensational.
Yeah, I mean, one little part of what you said that rings true, Ed, from a psychological point of view, is that while it may be true that, you know, you're constrained by society, by context, by who knows what, but it's always a good idea to build self-efficacy, because you know that is ultimately the thing you've got under control. So I can see the appeal of people like Andrew Tate and a lot of the right-wing influencers who do that. I mean, the one caveat with Tate, I guess, is that he also appeals to a certain sense of masochism, I suppose, because he also tells people, his audience, that they're pathetic, and like unless they conform to some crazy standards that he's got.
A little bit. I think it's really important. I think it's really interesting when you consider these things. I call this like cheerleading disguised as criticism. Sometimes people have done a really good job at taking a criticism, or what appears to be highly critical, and making you feel like you're taking a criticism, but really they're just cheerleading you, right? Like if I go up to a guy and I'm like, listen up, okay? You fat sack of shit. You need to get up. You need to go to the gym. You need to get better. You need to better yourself. You need this. Now, a person hearing that might, like from the outside, and then they might present it as like, well, no, look, like I'm being really, I'm pushing this guy really hard. And it's like, well, kind of, but like he knows this already, and you're telling him really what he wants to hear, right? Like being told like you can do it, you can make something more of yourself, you have the ability to change like the course of your life. That's a message that you like. You know, what's not fun to hear is somebody telling you like, hey, listen, you haven't talked to your mom and dad for 4 years because of a mistake you made. You need to go and apologize to them. That's a, like, when somebody's giving you things like what the Tates say and it sounds critical, but your emotional response is this like visceral excitement, you should pause for a second and be like, okay, wait, hold on. What's the likelihood that every time somebody challenges me or expresses skepticism, it's making me feel better and better and better and better, right? A really good critical thought should give you a level of discomfort for a bit where it's like, like, do I really want to like confront this person and like express this particular thing? Or like, oh, do I really need to like say this? Like, if that feeling is never happening, then nobody's actually challenging you in a meaningful way. They're just like cheerleading you and calling it criticism, but it's not actually, it's what you want to hear anyway.
From the content that we look at, we see that dynamic play out a lot, but there's another aspect to it where yes, it can be presented as, you know, like the situation you're in now is like kind of shit, but there is a path out, right? You know, like that's kind of being presented. But there's also this aspect where the guru people that we cover, they engage of one or two ways, or they can do both of this. And one is to like big up their audience, talk about how they're, you know, the kind of people that care about injustices in the world. They're people fighting back about, you know, the real issues in society and so on. And then there's the kind of negging side, which is like most people don't understand this. And, you know, you're all not going to get this. But if you do, you're going to be, you know, on the first step to getting to the right space. So there's like this kind of negging aspect of, you know, you could be better if you just were able to put in the effort. And that can sometimes also take the form, and this applies to your neck of the woods, that when you're telling your audience, like, you know, via the people that you discipline on streams, like, okay, you think better, fuck off, right? You then kind of let people know what behavior will be rewarded and not. And we saw like Eric Weinstein do this with his audience, where he was getting criticism from people like us and other people, and he went on his Discord. And
so what Chris Kavanaugh is taking a long time to say here is that we attract an audience, all right? And we bear some responsibility for the type of people that we attract to our show. And Destiny clearly attracts a ton of horrible people to his programming.
Kind of said, you know, if you guys don't do a better job of, you know, kind of policing the kind of criticism that is appearing in this Discord, I might have to pull back, you know, and just not interact as much. And it felt like, oh, that's because you could see the people were, you know, really invested in him, you know, taking part. So yeah, it's just there's a lot of ways to manipulate people, like through combining negative and positive, like messaging.
Yeah, for sure. None of it is necessarily bad. it's just the application of all of these things is so important. It's why when I debate people, I always try to push for examples, and I always try to give examples myself, because you can get people that can lay out a lot of theory next to each other and be in complete harmony.
And so when Destiny says none of this is necessarily bad, yeah, a lot of it is bad, right? You attract people in a antisocial direction, right? That's obviously bad. If you are prioritizing self-destructive drama, over content that elevates, right? You're engaging in something that's bad. Yeah, some things are clearly bad and antisocial and destructive, and some things are clearly elevating and ennobling.
Harmony, where it's like, I think that we need to stop the indoctrination of children. I think that children should be able to grow up free and happy and healthy. I think that parents need to be able to protect their children to do what's right. And then one guy will be like, that's why 14-year-olds should be able to take hormones, and the other guy will say that's why we need state mandated religion. Everything will line up, and then when you hit the applied part, for an example, it's like, wait a second, what? You realize that the theory is so vacuous or abstract that you could truly insert any value there. This is why I don't like to say, I hope I don't hit on things you guys have said before, because I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but people will ask me, people will say things like, oh, how do you keep yourself free from bias? That's a really interesting question. And when somebody asks somebody that and I hear the answer, I immediately know if they're full of shit or not, because the number one bullshit answer that people give is go, oh, well, I read a wide variety of media sources. So what the fuck, what? That doesn't mean anything. You read a wide variety of media. You can read a ton of shit and still be a biased dipshit. What do you mean? There are a ton of mental safeguards that you can have. Can you argue both sides of an issue incredibly convincingly, right? Such that you should be able to argue anybody that agrees with you and put it or disagrees with you and put a convincing argument on the other side.
So what he's talking about right here is just in large part IQ, right? To be able to argue a contrary point of view to your own, requires considerable cognitive processing power. If you do regularly read sources that are on the opposite side of the political spectrum from your own, that does speak well of you.
Or if somebody were to ask you the question of what would it take to convince you otherwise of this position, do you have an answer for that? Or are you well, I don't know. I don't think I can be. And I've had people tell me that. I don't think anything could convince me otherwise. Wait, what the fuck? Are you well read into a topic such that you could explain it at a decent level? If you say, I think Trump made America better, you're like, oh, well, how? This happened. I just did a debate with Gorka. And
I think Trump made America better by reversing the damage that Black Lives Matter had done under Obama for the first 3 years of the Trump presidency. Murder rates in America went down, crime rates went down. Trump made America better because by 2020, he had successfully gotten a hold and squashed immigration, including illegal immigration, legal immigration. By 2020, he was doing a great job on immigration, and he had reconfigured America's trade practices to be better aligned with the interests of Americans. So he kept us out of starting any new wars. So those are 4 reasons why I think Donald Trump did a good job.
I had to cut him off 2 or 3 times where I was like, how did Trump make America better? And he's like, well, the economy did better. I'm like, no. What did he do? It's well, I'm getting there. And unemployment is like, okay, well, what did he do? And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, if I stand next to a tree and the tree grows, I can't take credit for the tree growing. It just happened while I was there. And the inability to critically engage with questions like that, where it's like, okay, well, what are you doing to actually engage in critical thought? I think is usually a big indicator that that's not happening. So putting examples down for applied stuff rather than just laying out a bunch of bullshit theory is really important. Otherwise, I don't want to be standing
And a good point in the chat from Bob. How can you not indoctrinate children? They all get exposed to their parents' prejudices and their community's prejudices. Exactly. Good point.
To some dude, and we're agreeing on all these abstract points. But then when I look in practice, I see that we're on worlds apart of things. I'm like, well, no, hold on, fuck this. I don't agree with you when you say that. Wait, clearly something is disconnected here. Yeah.
Just before we leave this topic of some of these characters like Tate, you've got this great track record in terms of debating with some pretty extreme and dark characters. Nick Fuentes, I think Laura Southern, is that right? But at the same time, there's also been a fair bit of content where you're I don't know how to put it exactly, but
there's some level of camaraderie, or we're at least friend, if not friends, friend.
What is so dark about Lauren Southern? She's an immigration restrictionist, but I don't see what makes her so such a dark person.
Yeah.
Yes, that's essentially it. Perhaps there's an issue there, I guess, in terms of I get that one shouldn't sort of pretend that they're sort of some sort of inhuman monster, and they are human beings as well. But there can be a subtext there, right? Which is saying, oh, I disagree very much with his views, but I really respect his work ethic in doing this, and it was great to do this thing with them or whatever. And there can be a subtext where they're kind of okay, right? And legitimizing them.
Yeah, I think.
Right, as though Lauren Southern and Nick Fuentes need to be legitimized by Destiny, right? Lauren Southern and Nick Fuentes attract, a considerable portion of people who are interested in politics. They have a constituency for traditional and immigration restrictionist policies, and the idea that by debating them, the people then get bit by Lauren Southern and Nick Fuentes and just turned into rabid fans is absurd. Right? We did not evolve to be gullible. I don't buy what Matthew Brown was implicitly arguing there, the zombie bite theory of information, that if people are simply exposed to a populist or right-wing or authoritarian point of view, they're then going to become helpless before the blinding charisma of Nick Fuentes and Lauren Southern. I mean, anyone with an IQ above 110 is not going to remain a fan of Nick Fuentes for very long. So this is Destiny debating with Jean-Francois Garapi and Andy Warski, Tara McCarthy back in December 28, 2017.
Geek Tulu was presenting a case where every black people has sickle cell anemia. He's just saying, if you divide people into the group black people versus white versus Asian, you will end up with the group of black people being more likely to have sickle cell anemia. That's information that can be useful to a doctor.
And points to JF here. Makes a good point.
Can be useful to people in general. I mean, some of the examples of the use, because here Stephen started with the question of normative claims. And it's true, I will admit this. I don't often comment on normative claims, but there's a reason for it.
Okay, so making normative claims about facts does not discredit the facts. Right? If people can say something horrible based on a fact, that doesn't mean the fact is not a fact. The two things have nothing to do with each other. The normative claims that people make based on facts do not discredit the facts.
For this, it's that my opponents in the race realist debate are so stupid that they try to fight me on the factual ground. They are so bad at what they do that they come on the public space and they start claiming false stuff, such as race does not exist. Now, I'm happy to go on that ground today with Destiny, and I think that's why we're here. So let's dig deep into this. I do believe that there are some things, and Handy seemed to totally reject the use of race in personal choice and discrimination. I do believe that there are instances of correct personal choice that you can do based on race, which is not something that I would personally reproach. I'll give you one example, and I'd like to hear you guys on this. Is it fine for you guys to have racial preferences in your sexual preferences?
Yeah, I know a Mexican-American woman well, and it was vitally important to her that she marry a blue-eyed white guy. And that's exactly what she did. And I don't reproach her for her sexual preference.
To have certain races of people that you prefer having sex with?
Yes, I'd say so. Because it's more of a natural thing of who you're attracted to, I guess, right? Like people who have like yellow fever, are down for only Asians. I have a few friends like that, and no one finds that racist. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who'd be like, "Oh my God, you're fetishizing Asians," but it's just they prefer Asians or something, right?
Yeah, I'm a white dude, and fucking I love olive skinned women. Like, period. There's just something about it.
Okay, before we get too far down on this topic, so earlier you said if my grouping is better than random, it can give me some information. So I don't disagree with that. But if your grouping is better than random, that doesn't give you a reason to create a separate race of people. So for instance, if I were to group people based on height, I could probably...
Okay, grouping people based on race, that's not something that is just, objectively... definitively clear, because you're arguing semantics. You can call them historically descended from this area population, right? An extended family, whatever you want to call them. The way it works in the real world is people use race, and the way people use race, approximates real world ancestral groupings.
Probably make some predictions about these people, or by weight even. Actually, that would be a better one. If I group people by BMI, I could make predictions, pretty accurate predictions about the health of said people, especially in regards to things like diabetes or hypertension. But just because I would have a group of people that are above a certain BMI, I wouldn't, by extension of that, say, well, here is a different race of people, right?
No, it's
So that's another really weak argument by Destiny. if you object to the word race, then just use ancestral populations or whatever politically correct term you want to use.
True, and it's not based on the information that we can obtain on certain diseases like sickle cell that we classify races. Races, they were first classified really from observations, from visual observation, and then later, in fact, within the last 2 decades, we've begun having genetic data that seems to confirm that the general group that we characterize as blacks, whites, Asians, they do refer to some genetic reality. And in fact, when we place all the genetic information that we get on humanity into a computer and we ask the computer to separate these groups as best as he can, of course, the races come as a natural division that the computer finds quite easily. So somehow the recent data on genetics in human simply confirms the old idea of race that we had. Of course, it's not a 100% clean boundary. Of course, there is race mixing. Of course, there are people who are white who do have genes that come from black ancestry. That's all fine because we recognize that we have millions of ancestors in the end, and so we're all a mix.
So who watching this program would think that Jean-Francois Garipi or Andy Warski or Terry McCarthy were somehow legitimated by appearing on a show with Destiny? It's absurd. I mean, Destiny is a trash-talking, cellar-dwelling live stream, right? That's the type of show he puts on that's trashy and filled with spectacle and performance and is nasty and edgy. And the idea that someone putting out such a trashy show is legitimating people who come on his show is absurd. Like, is someone legitimated by appearing on a Real Housewives show or some reality TV show?
Of genes, but that doesn't mean that the categories are meaningless. In fact, from a genetic standpoint, we can tell with pretty high certainty where your ancestors come from based on your genes today.
Okay, so firstly, the claim that this is something that you have to elaborate on because I don't think even you believe this. You say that genetic information today confirms old ideas of race. So old ideas of race, what do you mean by that? Because there were extreme claims made by phrenologists, for example, in the past that are definitely not confirmed by...
Yeah. So I just mean the instinctive division that we've made of races, the idea that black people differ from Asians, that Asians differs from whites, and that Native Americans, for example, are distinguishable from the 3 other groups. So that kind of idea. What I mean is that the subdivisions that we've made based on visual characteristics of facial appearance were not completely wrong. We were not beside the track. In fact, genetic information confirms that these divisions exist.
Okay, but even if these divisions do exist, even if you can cluster genes in some way to say that, like, well, this ancestry probably originated here, or this people's ancestors probably originated here, what is the argument for? It seems like that you don't have these clusters of genes that describe important traits that would make them worth classifying as a different race of people. Or do you think that there are traits that exist, that like phenotypes that can be described by gene clusters that are unique to ancestors of people?
Oh, well, I mean, we have some cases of characteristics that are specific to a village or to a given subpopulation, and that...
Right. We know that certain people do better in higher altitudes than other people. We know that the 100-meter race is dominated by people of West African heritage. We know that Ashkenazi Jews dominate certain areas of intellectual life.
For which we have genetic knowledge. One example is a special disorder that affects my people, actually, the French Canadians. We have a genetic disorder that really emerged in Quebec, and we know exactly the line of families. We know pretty much everyone who has that disorder. It's a handful of people. Those are very rare genetic diseases, so they're easily tractable. There are other features that are more complex for which we don't have single genes, and in fact, we know that we probably won't ever find single genes because we know that the behavior is too complex. IQ is one of them. So IQ, we can measure it across races. We can make averages across races. And it's pretty established at this point, and I'd like to hear if you disagree. It's pretty established at this point that the black and Asian and white IQ differ on average.
Okay, so firstly, just to speak to your first thing, so you keep going back to these very precise geographical things. I wouldn't disagree on this, but this, you must understand that this is different than race then, right? That if you talk about small geographical subsets of people, this is a different grouping now that you've moved to, which I would agree with, versus race. We can go back to the sickle cell example, where there are specific African Americans that lived in specific geographic areas that were exposed to malaria that developed this thing, but the grouping here then falls on geographic lines, not on racial lines, right?
Yeah, so what I explained, and I'm currently preparing a video about this. It's true that I've never talked about this on the public space, but I'm currently preparing a collaboration with Mati Buddha. And what I explained in that video is the idea of race realism is not a statement about the number of races there are in humans. In fact, I recognize that we can divide humanity in 5 races or 600 races. It's just that as you progress between dividing it in 5 and dividing it in 600, of course, you're going to observe different phenomena. First, if we divide it in 600, we are all mixed race in some way. If you divide it in 5, then maybe some of us are not.
So, yeah, this is the Jean-Francois that I remember from late 2017, early 2018, much more reasonable than his newest iteration.
In answer to Charles Murray, he was saying, average IQ scores around 70 in Africa suggest that nurture matters, as well as nature, since those scores are much lower than among African Americans. I've said it and I'm more convinced of it than I ever was. I've said it before. The nature-nurture dichotomy is one of the most successful liberal psyops ever.
It's a useful dichotomy. All right, let's say you're pregnant and there are nuclear tests that are happening near you, or a nuclear bomb goes off near you, or there's a chemical company that releases dangerous toxins that infect you and damage your child. All right, that's going to have severe consequences. We see a lot of immigrants to the United States, right? Their children are on average about 3 inches taller than they are, right? Particularly, say, immigrants from Mexico and immigrants from South Asia, like immigrants from Vietnam or Cambodia. They come to the United States, they have better nutrition in the United States, and their children on average are about 3 inches taller than they are. So that's an environmentally dominated difference, right? They've still got the Vietnamese or Chinese or Cambodian or Mexican genetic heritage of their parents, but in a different environment, it manifests itself differently.
The very idea that there are 2 categories here, and that there is one and then there's the other. And the thing...
Yeah, some massive release of toxins or lead exposure. Lead exposure lowers IQ, right? Not being given certain micronutrients will lower your IQ. Right? There are ways that you can successfully rise IQ in poor countries through micronutrition supplementation. For example, there's a Steve Saylor writing back in 2012. The United States used to have problems caused by a lack of iodine in the diet. Right? So manufacturers started adding iodine to salt, and so this IQ sapping problem went away. There are a lot of problems around the world, particularly in poor countries, that are sapping IQ. Lead saps IQ. Adding iron to flour raises IQ. Right? This is one of the many reasons the military found that mental sharpness of draftees in World War II much more satisfactory than in World War I. And so instead of trying to get local manufacturers to add micronutrients to staples, perhaps have parents sprinkle the nutrients on their kids' food. This is a highly cost-effective way to raise national IQ. Higher national average IQs correlate closely with a host of good things, such as higher school testing scores and higher per capita GDP. You can't really have a high-functioning democracy unless you've got an average IQ of at least about 92. And the Gates Foundation has gotten into this field of micronutrient supplementation. So there are dramatic things that you can do to raise the quality of life for people and to stop doing things that destroy the quality of life for people. And this is an environmental area.
Things in one are not part of the other. That is the great false dichotomy of nature-nurture. And it's built on the precept that you can take away children from people, put them in some other environment, a replacement. That is the academia, the public school, the alternative parenting style, or whatever. And you're going to have an answer to that question, whether it was nature or nurture. But there's a big problem with this experimental practice. And
yeah, you take children away from being beaten over the head, abused by their parents, or you take them away from toxins or from lead poisoning or asbestos poisoning, and you are going to dramatically improve the potential and life quality of those kids.
The philosophy that is built in this experimental practice is that generally society does not work on that mode. Society does not work on exchanging babies ad infinitum and randomly. The vast majority of children will be raised by their biological parents. the vast majority of children will not be adopted. And so the nature-nurture question becomes very intermixed, because in the home, the genes of the parents are in the child. The genes of the parents are contributing to the parent's capacity to be a good parent. And in fact, the genes may be totally in tune with themselves in the children, such that the right parent, the biological parent, is a better fit to raise their children because they have the same genes, and these genes have evolved to self-raise rather than to raise any random kid out there. I'm personally convinced that I am a good parent, but I couldn't be very confident that I can take a random troubled child from a troubled genetic environment, like in some poor part of the nation, and from another race, and that I could do any better job than his own parents. And that's because I don't think my genes are.
I was raised with a vegetarian diet. It absolutely crippled me. Right? I had poor health my entire life. I was basically bedridden in my 1920s. And then after that, I just struggled through life at about 2/3 level of normal health, because I was raised with a vegetarian diet, and I became acclimated to a vegetarian diet, and I continued in a vegetarian diet that's just terrible for many people's health. Right? You raise kids with a vegetarian diet, you're raising them with serious risks for brain and body development, right? Regular supplementation of iron, zinc, and B12 would not mitigate these risks, right? It's not at all clear that vegetarianism or veganism is safe for children, right? It's very likely, very possible it's going to have negative cognitive effects and just strength effects and mood effects. And you're also raising your children to be socially unpopular. Right? You create havoc when your child is vegetarian, and then they have to go out into the world and be social, right? They can't eat what normal people eat, right? You are socially handicapping your kids. You're cognitively handicapping your kids, right? So whether or not you raise your kid as vegetarian, right, it's going to have a big effect on the kid, right? My life was crippled because I was raised vegetarian. I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, right? If I'd been diagnosed with ADHD early on, all right, I would have had far more academic success. I would have had far more social success. I would have been far happier, and I would have avoided the constant thrill seeking that characterized my life.
Are the ultimate response to the ultimate parent. I think my genes are just one way of parenting that's good with my genes. Ariel Soares says, it's funny, I had an anthropology professor who was able to call out the nature-nurture false dichotomy. She was a huge leftist in her own ways, though. Oh yeah, there's always people who are in the system. They detect cognitive dissonance sometimes, and they're like, "Oh, that really doesn't work. We're bullshitting here." So here's two things. There's two errors with Steve Saylor here. First, entertaining the nature-nurture dichotomy is falling for a lie. It's an academic lie. Just to undo that lie, you just have to make a simple statement in your mind. You ask yourself, is there an example of a nurturing behavior that I can name, that I can list, that is not taken its root in genetics?
Yeah, all our behaviors are obviously rooted in genetics. But if your children are raised with toxins, or if your children are raised with a vegetarian diet, if your children are raised with lead or asbestos exposure, or in some crippling cult, obviously you're reducing the potential of these kids.
Is there a single nurturing behavior that is independent of DNA?
How does that deny the importance of environment and non-genetic factors?
Is there any evidence that I have that some parental behavior of some kind, any of them really, can go on without DNA? Is there any evidence that I have that variation of DNA do not also influence the parent's capacity to parent? Because the great denial of the nature-nurture dichotomy, the secret element that is denied in this magic trick, is parents. The nature-nurture dichotomy.
He's just making this up. No one denies that parental behavior, like all behavior, has a substantial genetic component. But we've extensively studied, to what extent is intelligence, for example, genetic, and it comes out at about 0.48, or effectively about half of the direct cause for intelligence is definitively genetic. Political predispositions, religious predispositions, personality predispositions, like all behaviors and predispositions have a substantial genetic component.
Dichotomy only works if you ignore parents. when you start realizing that parents are made of genes, that genes evolve not just in the children for him to be intelligent, but in the parent for them to be good parent. You realize that nothing holds, then nurture is nature, which is why I've made this video many years ago. Nurture is nature. If you see a bird caring for their children, you're going to call it nature. You're not going to say, a moment of nurture in an otherwise natural moment.
And then there's some, natural disaster, right? That wipes out a population or completely transforms an environment. Then the survival of particular animals and forms of plant life will be affected by this external cause, external to the genetics of the individual forms of life.
Moment. No one is ever going to say this in front of a bird building a nest for their children. Oh my God, that was a natural moment, up to the point where the parent bird carried worms into the mouth of its babies. Then it became a nurture moment. No, nurture is what biological creatures do. Nurture evolves, by the way. Parental behavior evolves because they help genes continue their path into the future. So that's the first error of Steve Saylor. The second error is to claim that an observation implies another when it doesn't. It does not follow. A non sequitur. He says that average IQ scores around 70 in Africa suggest that nurture matters as well as nature. Now, a lot of people got smokescreened by this part. Because here, Steve Saylor seems to be saying, Jeff.
We know that the presence of micronutrients enables, higher IQ potential. The presence of certain toxins such as lead, right, reduces IQ. Right, this is in the environment. It has a substantial effect on IQ.
Don't worry. He's saying that both nurture and nature works. He's just taking the middle ground. When you take the middle ground on things just to make it look digestible, just to make all of the sides of a debate accept somehow that your statement is kind of an average statement, you are slowly leaving the truth. The truth is not in the middle.
Well, we've got a study here from Duke University. Lead exposure in last century shrank the IQ scores of half of Americans. I say that's a pretty substantial environmental factor.
The truth is out there. I mean, the truth is at the edge. Now, the thing is, this difference between blacks in Africa and blacks in America, we've been talking about it on the show a lot. It is absolutely unknown that this difference is due to any form of non-genetic influence. That is what I'm saying, non-genetic, because I'm clearer, because I don't want to entertain the false dichotomy. But in this false...
Yeah, obviously the lack of certain micronutrients such as iodine reduces IQ scores in Africa. And the presence of toxins such as lead, reduces IQ scores. Yeah, obviously there are environmental impacts on IQ.
Dichotomy, it's what he calls nurture. There is absolutely no evidence that if you take the entirety of the African-American population and move them to Africa, that their IQ will drop. There is absolutely no evidence that if you take the average African today and bring them into America, that they will somehow lift their IQ up to the population just because we have good nutrition, good schools, good whatever. There is absolutely no evidence. And when you do that mistake of thinking, well, because the difference has happened in the last few hundred years, it must not be evolution, then you don't fully understand evolution. And this is what I have to say tonight. Steve Saylor shows through this error that he's not thinking in evolution mode. And just to be sure, I challenged him, and he only got worse and worse as I was interacting with him. So it was very disappointing.
So this Duke study estimates that lead exposure has reduced the average American IQ by 3 points. That's significant.
Let's have a look at our interaction. So first, I started by saying incorrect conclusion. African Americans have a different evolutionary history than Africans. So what I'm saying here, and that's a teachable moment if you want to know how to speak publicly without committing to stuff. I haven't committed to a particular hypothesis. But here Steve Saylor is suggesting that taking the slaves from Africa, bringing them to America, was kind of a natural experiment. He's saying, look, we brought them to America and their IQ increased. Haha, therefore good environment. The problem being, this experiment is invalid because you have not selected randomly your starting point. You have not excluded the possible genetic evolution that's happening within America, and therefore you haven't excluded still the genetic hypothesis for the IQ difference between the blacks of America and the blacks of Africa. Here are two hypotheses that could absolutely be valid And it's not just that, he's trying to say that
We know that cousin marriage, right? Incest effectively reduces IQ. So if a population stops practicing things like cousin marriage, its average IQ is going to go up by 2 or 3 points.
I'm kind of grasping at straws. I'm not grasping at straws. Those hypotheses are more valid than any of what he expressed up to now. So it's incredible to see someone claim that I grasp at straws, when in fact, these hypotheses are pristine in my view. They are not demonstrated in any way to be unrealistic, hard, or false. So they are just as valid as something can be valid. So here's one hypothesis. The mechanism of selection of the slaves led to a foundational population that was higher IQ than the average Africans. So imagine that the people who get captured are more lazy. They have higher IQ, they have less of a warrior mentality. They get captured by the tougher guy. They get sent to America. Or imagine a selection process through which, okay, there were smart people in Africa and the brutes around them just didn't like it. They saw them as threat, and they were more likely to capture them, make them prisoners, and then sell them as slaves. Another possibility is that intelligence was a survival element of the whole slave travel process. Imagine that, I don't know, there was a scurvy happening on boats and people were dying and resources were limited. And eventually the most clever slaves knew how to show to the white man that they should be kept alive. The least clever ones were executed or abandoned at sea and died. I don't have any sign that this is unrealistic. And here's another hypothesis. And this is what I told him. There's 1,000 ways in which you could have a genetic hypothesis of IQ differences between Africa and America. Imagine that once the slaves had arrived, there were, in the Christian society of America, there were a set of pressures that were just different from Africa. And imagine that within 4 generations, higher IQ was selected because it was helping slaves stay out of trouble or do better at liberation and at reproduction. Under the condition where you're living under a white society, it's a very different world than Africa. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that the same evolutionary pressures apply to the African as they apply to the slave under white supervision. And here's another hypothesis. The admixture with Europeans might have opened up a part of the genome of African Americans is inherited from Europeans, so interbreeding has occurred. Perhaps there are genes for intelligence that made it through, and combined with the evolutionary explanation, perhaps these genes were particularly sought after to survive better in white society. And there are people trying to do side of the table math of the worst kind. I'm so disappointed when I see this, what appears to be fans of Steve Seiler coming at me and saying, no, Jeff, 25% European genetics times IQ. You're not going to tell me that because you have 25% European genetics, you can only inherit of a 25% difference from the 100 IQ of Europeans. You're never going to get Papa JF to assume additivity of the genetic components of intelligence. Fuck you for trying. No, genes don't work that way. Genes don't work that way at all. You could have 0.1% of white genes, and these could be the genes that just give you a huge boost of intelligence. There are nonlinear effects. We don't understand them very much, but you cannot assume that they're not there. You just cannot. Genetics is complex, and it's not a linear calculation. And what's most offensive to me, and what shows me the great failure of Steve Seiler, is his response to my challenge, basically, because there's a way you can say, oh, yeah, you know what, JF? I was phrasing it loosely, but you're correct. You're technically correct. You may be a little more autistic than me about it, but you know what? You're right. It's possible that there are other explanations than nurture. But no, instead, this is the response I get, and this is where I'm starting to see the jury comes out. As Harvard superstar geneticist David Reich...
Yeah, he's got to blame it on the Jews. And he can't really back it up with empirical evidence, right? He just has to make these sweeping claims, and he feels like providing evidence and examples is beneath him.
Pointed out to Fleet Street hack Angela Saini. Boo! Africans have been evolving mostly in isolation for 70,000 years. In contrast, 1619 was only 405 years ago.
Well, either that's true or it's not. Africans did largely evolve in isolation for approximately 70 million years, and Africans only came to the United States in large numbers in the 17th century. So it's factually, empirically correct.
What the fuck is wrong with this guy? First, this academic dick-sucking superstar geneticist. Steve, there's one superstar geneticist alive, and it's me. David.
Okay, absurd. All right, what valuable research has Jean-Francois done in the field of genetics? David Reich is a star in his field.
Reich. Ian says David Fort Reich. No, but it's like, what the fuck is this? This is beta. This is more than beta. It's like, it's the low testosterone world rising, really. It's superstar geneticist. So ad hominem, that's an ad hominem. Fallacious ad hominem. Oh, look, this person. And on top of it, it's like you talk to me in memes rather than science. You know, the 1619 thing, this is not meant to me. You're complaining about Project 1619, which was a project by some far-left black historian to kind of review the American history and put the blacks at the center of it. You're not talking to me here. You're talking to unrelated points.
It wasn't a historian. It was a New York Times journalist who created the 1619 project.
It's unrelated people. But most importantly, because, okay, this at worst, it's fun. At best, it's fun. I mean, you know, it's fun to laugh a little bit about this weird behavior that anonymous Jews have. I mean, Steve Saylor being the one in the gang that wasn't anonymous. And, you know, this is where I see the subversion. His anthology in paperback will be called Noticing. It's like this guy is surrounded by Jews. I hope you're not noticing Steve Saylor, because your book editor is Jewish. Everyone gets ducks around you are Jewish. You're really a bunch of Jews in a gay up. This is what you are.
And how exactly is Steve Saylor's work, which has been moving along fairly uniform lines for approximately 30 years, how exactly is it a gay op? And yeah, if in some fields there are a disproportionate number of Jews. In other fields, there are a disproportionate number of people of West African heritage. In other fields, there are a disproportionate number of people of Northeastern Asian heritage. So what?
And you're no different than the gay up I've exposed like 7 years ago. The Kraut NT group, they were all in a Discord. We're going to debunk it.
No, the Kraut and T Discord was largely about doxing people who put forward race realist arguments, right? Just the very opposite of what Steve Saylor's been doing.
JF, we're going to give some trouble to JF. But here's where the objective error is. It's this implication that, oh, well, we're safe to assume it's nurture because Africans have been evolving in 70,000 years in isolation, whereas the date for the slavery events is just 405 years ago. If you think that time is a factor in evolution, you don't understand evolution. You can have evolution within a single generation. If something is really, really bad to have.
To deny that time plays a role in evolution is absurd. Yeah, you can have dramatic examples of evolution in a compressed time period, but that does not deny that time plays a role in evolution.
And really, really, everyone who has this dies. There you go. You had evolution in a single generation. For some life forms, a generation is 20 minutes. You can have massive evolutionary events in 20 minutes. You can have a complete change of the population's dynamics and population's constitution in 20 minutes. So if you think that it can...
He's not saying that there can't be a faster change with evolution. He's saying that it usually plays a role. Old Hype tweets, so Jean-Francois Garapi and Nick Fuentes are knowingly lying about Steve Saylor. They're not confused. They're not making a mistake. They know Steve Saylor saying that the differences between U.S. blacks and African blacks in things like IQ likely have a large environmental component. Right? This should be the default hypothesis that most things have both a genetic and an environmental component. JF says, this is like destiny. Disgusting duo. And Nick Fuentes says about Steve Saylor, wow, so he's not even based on HBD. He's a pro-Israel Jew who talks about crime stats but believes the disparity is due to environmental factors. Seems he's like destiny but Jewish. I mean, yeah, it's just moronic, right? Steve does have a genetic Jewish component. He was adopted and he was raised Roman Catholic. But exactly what that has to do with any of his arguments on this score, I don't see.
Have happened. One of the 4 hypotheses I just listed. If you think that this cannot have happened in 405 years, you are absolutely beside the track. And I pointed that to him. And again, we had bad faith engagement. I said, doesn't matter. Evolution has variable speeds. I'm trying to help him here not mislead the public. Because when you start saying, oh yeah, you know, this IQ difference, 70 in Africa, 85 in America, that's nurture. Or that's...
Does he really think that Steve Saylor does not accept that evolution can have variable speeds?
It's at least an argument for nurture, whatever percentage you want to attribute to it. You are misleading people about methodology and proper methodology. No, we do not use the comparison of Africa and America to conclude stuff about genetics versus environment, because we have better experiment for genetics versus environment question, including the twin studies. So I'm trying to help him not mislead people into thinking that evolution...
And Bob in the chat says you cannot raise the IQ you're born with, but you can't lower it, for example, with malnutrition. Doesn't JF know you can lower the IQ of people? And that if a population as a whole suffers malnutrition, and when you remove this impediment as a group, they will test higher. Evolution can happen faster and slower. If a mutation is highly beneficial, it may quickly outcompete and change the population as a whole. Yes. And after you had a soccer ball, all right, you are going to be lower in your IQ than you were, prior to heading a soccer ball. There's all sorts of activities that you can do that will lower your IQ. And if you simply abstain from doing them, right, you're going to have a higher IQ than you would have if you'd engaged in those damaging behaviors.
It can be assumed to be at a certain speed everywhere at the same time. He says, your point seems to be, well, just because you have simple arithmetic on your side doesn't mean I couldn't still be right, which is true, but it's also embarrassing for you. No, and some people were pointing out, you are embarrassing yourself. It's not embarrassing at all, my position. My position is you have affirmed having a methodological separation where there was none. Taking blacks out of Africa, selecting them non-randomly, and bringing them to America is not anyhow a natural experiment allowing to draw the conclusions you've drawn. I've not even stated a thing yet. I've not even taken position. And in fact, I don't care much about this issue. The reason I care about your framing of this issue is that it's misleading. You're lying to people. And, Nick Fuentes has very well documented this group. He says, wow, so he's not even based on HBD. Let me get this straight. He is a pro-Israel Jew who talks about crime stats but believes the disparity is due to environmental factors. Do I have that right? So he's like Destiny but Jewish. Nice. Yeah, but Nick, Destiny is Jewish. He told it straight to my face.
There's no evidence that Destiny is Jewish, but because JF wants to believe that, Destiny, played into his fixation, right? Just because someone says they're Jewish doesn't mean they're Jewish, right? You can't take what people say at face value. Boy, Jean-Francois has really, kept heading lower and lower.
Straight to my face, Destiny told me he was Jewish. So I said, exactly, they can't help but to leave that little door open to Marxism. He believes the American environment, and I put environment in quotation mark here, boosted black IQ by basically 15 points. And what I mean here by basically is, he's going to tell you, no, I didn't say 15 points. No, but what your sentence implies is that a significant component of this 15 points can be attributed to your separated concept of nurture.
Yeah, take people out of a toxic environment, give them micronutrients that they need, and you'll raise the IQ of that group, or at least you'll stop the damage that's holding the IQ down. Looking at the chat, Phil says, I think the skills learned from boxing will far outweigh whatever imaginary IQ points you may or may not lose. Right? There's no doubt that getting punched in the head is going to reduce your IQ. That's incontrovertible. Though how much it will reduce your IQ will vary, depending on the severity of the impact and on your own unique genetic factors. Now, the skills you might learn in boxing may outweigh the damage that you suffer in lower IQ points for certain contexts, but in other contexts, it will not benefit you.
And I say, whatever that percentage is, even if you were to tell me, no, I believe it's 50% of this 15-point difference, that's still too much. Because you know how much you can attribute to nurture based on the African-American difference in IQ? 0. Invalid experiment. False conclusion. Fallacious reasoning. This is your answer. He says it's worth pointing out his conspicuous surge in popularity was astroturfed by his Passage Press book tour. Another Teal cutout run by yet another.
Yeah, without this imaginary Peter Thiel money, no one would know who Steve Saylor is. Right, cutting edge commentary there from Nick Fuentes.
Jewish academic, and promoted by the same clique pushing colorblind meritocracy against anti-Jewish DEI. I'm noticing something. DK Shadows has so many layers. It never fucking stops. It never.
Yeah, it never stops that people on the margins of society, right, who've been rejected by society, will increasingly grab for something to give them solace, give them strength, and for some kind of magic key explanation. And for some people like JF, they will grasp at the magic key that Jews are responsible for most of the evil in the world.
Stops. It's all Jews that believe this, Jews that believe that, Jews that are there to cover for those who believe this.
Right. There's no, important policy matter or any controversial area where you will not find a significant number of Jews on both sides of the question.
It never stops. And they always fail at following a foundational axiomatic truth. That is how.
Yeah, he's saying Jews will always fail at following certain axioms. They will always fail at following their principles into the abyss. But give me some examples. He's unable to come up with any examples. He loves these sweeping generalizations that Jews are perfidious, but he can't back up his argument.
I recognize them at this point. That is how I work. At this point, I'm like, can this guy follow principles down into the abyss? And if not, he's probably a Jew.
Right. This idea that, any racial or ethnic group is just completely incapable of following principles is absurd without any empirical justification. It just shows you've gone off the deep end.
The Jew never follows principles down into anything.
The Jew never follows principles down into anything. I mean, you can't say that about any group. You can't say that about Seventh-day Adventists. You can't say that about gays. You can't say that about Nigerians or Japanese or Aborigines or Pakistanis or Palestinians or Germans or the native people of central Mexico, right? You can't say that about any group. There's no empirical foundation to say that about any group. It's just insane.
You really don't have to bet them very far before you. Oh no, we can't go there. That is how I do. Ariel Soares says, do you have any book or source recommendations to learn more about research methodology or statistic and data analysis? If you're talking in the domain of behaviors and genetics, Robert Plumman's book is the best standard. If you're talking about the math of statistics, I'm less into this, and I don't remember a book that has particularly fascinated me. You're gonna have to find someone else to recommend this. But if you want the stats within the domain of genetics and behavior, Robert Plumman is very solid. Ariel Soares says, they always fail, JF. You say that as if it wasn't intentional. Oh yeah, I mean, that's an alternative hypothesis. Why is it that the Jews never follow their...
Yeah, so it's not insane. I should take that back. He is appealing to a particular audience that wants to believe these things. Sharp comment in the chat, the alt-right went from having interesting insights about Jews to cope about Jews when the alt-right is just too lazy to make an argument.
Our principle down into the abyss. It could be that it's not their principles. And then you enter the question of, why is Peter Thiel somehow a billionaire out there just throwing money at these ideological takeovers?
Yeah, why is Peter Thiel doing this? Because every living thing tries to create an environment around it that is most conducive to its thriving and to the thriving of people that it cares about.
Buildings of Twitter, of weird Twitter accounts that somehow can take the issue of race with the right, but when it comes to Israel, will show their true colors. Well, and then you enter the big problem of the media industry. It's that it's all a bunch of cardboards bought out for you and cut out for you.
And where's the example? Like, how does he back this up? All right, just made a sweeping statement about the media industry, but he can't back up his sweeping statements. It's okay to make sweeping statements. I believe in generalizations, but you need to back them up. And JF completely fails to back up his sweeping generalizations. They just sound absurd.
Like, when YouTube rose and when independent creators like me rose, there was a first window at a possible world of liberty free thinking, and if you come to Papa JF will deliver.
Well, there were blogs 20 years before JF rose, and when JF rose, he was being rewarded by a particular type of algorithm. Right? There's never been a social media platform that did not employ some algorithm that would advantage some people and disadvantage other people.
His thoughts to you. That was the first time in history where the person speaking in front of you on the screen wasn't sculpted by a set of millionaire entities that wanted them to be in some way. But with these guys, they build Twitter accounts, and it's an order. It's a command. You have to think a certain way to receive a grant from Peter Thiel. And even
yeah, of course, Peter Thiel and other billionaires just don't hand out their money willy-nilly, right? They want to create an environment most conducive to their own thriving and to the thriving of people that they care about.
Even if he doesn't come to you explicitly and say, JF, tweet this, JF, tweet that, if he selects you for his money, it's because you're going to have taken a certain path. And so you end up with people who are talking to you don't have your interest at heart. You end up with just a bunch of cardboards, talking heads paid for by a dark network of money that you don't even know why it's there.
They don't have your interests at heart. Who's the you? They have the interests at heart of people that they love, and they don't have the interests at heart of people who are opposed to people they love.
You don't even know what is the ultimate goal of P13. That's how you get Jewish subversion of culture. Silver Spider says, hey, JF, a liberal told me once that if we deprive someone of food, their brain wouldn't grow, and that proves nurture. I said, if you took two people, one with the highest potential for 90 IQ and the other for 140 IQ, is there any amount of food/nurture that would make them equal? He stopped talking to me. That is a very good counter. I would add even the counter that his example is invalid to begin with. Who brings you your food when you're a baby? Your parents. What are parents made of? Are they made up of environment or genes? They're made up of genes, certainly. So you can't say that the food is independent of genetics. It's not a separate category. The talent of your parents at bringing certain quality foods might very well have an influence on your IQ. Is that the environment? Well, no. Because your parent is delivering this because he has genes that make him better parent than some other parent. And he wouldn't deliver that good quality food to any children. He delivers it to you because you're their children. Invalid, just... And yes, someone calls it racist LARP. It is what it is. There's a bunch of people who are hired to gather racist attention, racialist attention, call it whatever you want. They're hired to gather this attention, but direct it away from genuine evolutionary thinking, and then be sent like sheep to the slaughterhouse.
So JF thinks that he is the epitome of evolutionary thinking. But evolution is profoundly affected by environment. Right? It's profoundly affected by toxins, by catastrophic changes like earthquakes and volcanoes, by the actions of human beings, war, pestilence.
Into the fallacies of the left. DK Shadow says, yep, it's a LARP like Kraut. Bronze Age Pervert here, and his classical statement on, while for the sake of truth, I think facts about racial disparities should be discussed, it's not good at all politically. In fact, it's impossible in the present circumstances. Only a myth of race blindness is workable. So, hey, oh, look, come to me. I have the truth for you. And here, I'm willing to engage with the truth. But we're going to have to lie about this. That is Eric Weinstein. That is Brett Weinstein. That is Steve Saylor. That is Bronze Age Pervert. That is every single Jew in existence. Not a single one of them are capable of prioritizing the truth over their own political interest.
That's absurd. All right. Most Jews cannot put forward a political ideology, just like most non-Jews cannot put forward a coherent political ideology. Most Jews think primarily about their family, their extended family, their friends, their community, their profession, and their education and their hobbies. Just like most non-Jews primarily care about their family, their extended family, their friends, their community, their profession, their education, and their hobbies. Neither Jews nor non-Jews are primarily focused on politics. Right? What he just said about Jews wouldn't fit for any group.
That is it for my comment on Steve Saylor.
All right. Wow. JF has really gone off the deep end. Let's get back to Destiny talking to Decoding the Gurus.
This goes back to the, there's so much to dig into. Like I've been like exploring this. I've been writing a lot of thoughts down on this relating to aesthetic and function. I think a lot of the criticisms that I get are people that think I do.
I don't understand his point about aesthetics and function.
Things as an aesthetic rather than functionally, and I don't blame them because
he's over intellectualizing what he does. What he does is deliberately take his shows into the toilet to attract a wide audience who wants spectacle and nastiness. You don't need to overthink it as he's doing now.
Usually 99% of the time it is the case. When I started getting into political debate in 2016, my style was very brutal. Like the goal of me was to make your political idol look like an uninformed buffoon. And then that's how I would pull people over to my side. They would email me and they'd go like, man, like I really like this guy. And then I saw him like flounder so hard in this debate. And I felt.
And what type of people would you pull over to your side? Would you pull over professors of theology? Would you pull to your side professors of economics? No, you'd pull morons over to your side who want spectacle, who want to feel like that their type of politics has vanquished the opposition. So he deliberately, aims his show at a lower common denominator.
Felt kind of dumb, so I started watching, blah, blah, blah. That was like my initial stuff. Since then, I think definitely like 2018, 2019 onwards, I'm trying to take more of like an empathetic approach because I think if I can get into somebody's world a little bit more and then argue from their perspective, I think I have a better job like pulling people over. And that involves getting substantially closer to some figures than most people would otherwise. Whether or not I get too close to some people or I humanize some people too much, I mean, like there's good arguments on both sides of that. Like, should you, debating Nick in person, maybe okay, but like going to dinner with him, is that okay? Or, like debating this person, is that okay? But like,
Yeah, why would going to dinner with Nick be more heinous than going to dinner with a communist, with a Marxist? I don't understand.
Giving her tips or moderating a debate on her side, is that okay? I think there's like a really rich, like a ton of stuff to dig through there that you could argue on both sides. I think that the conversation, though, is usually poisoned by the fact that the vast majority of people that stand next to somebody and say like, oh, well, I might not agree with everybody.
The conversation is poisoned because that's your deliberate strategy for making money and attracting a large audience, right? The conversation is poison because you deliberately cultivate a nasty conversation. You deliberately cultivate nasty shows. You deliberately cultivate a nitpicking, rhetorically effective method for giving people a visceral emotional experience and thinking that they've heard something profound.
Says, but I think I can still be like friends with him. Usually when somebody says that, they are full of fucking shit and they will co-sign 99% of that fucking person's opinions. I have almost never in my fucking life have I heard somebody say, listen, like we disagree on a lot, but we can still be friends. Really? Well, what the fuck do you disagree on? Like, show us. I never see that ever. So when I say it to somebody, I can understand, at least on an emotional level, where you're like, sure, you disagree with him. And like, you guys are like eating dinner. Yeah. What disagreements do you have? And they might not know, like, okay, well, like I've done like 50 million fucking debates where we're screaming at this guy, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm sympathetic, empathetic even towards the emotional feeling there. Yeah. Because it usually is bullshit.
Yeah, I think there's the issue that, like, as you say, this is something that everybody says, or a lot of people say, and it disguises an actual ideological overlap that's huge.
Yeah.
But there's also the issue, specifically in your case, like, I mean, recently I heard how much you annoyed Nick Fuentes and Sneeko by coming into the Twitter space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically shitting in their party, and that was very enjoyable, right? And I thought the way that you interrupted their kind of backslapping session was effective and could possibly only be done by someone who was taking the kind of tone that you.
Destiny is really good at what he does. I don't think there's any more compelling live streamer, but what he does is produce spectacle, right? He doesn't produce clarity. He doesn't usually produce depth. He doesn't give people important ideas, all right? He creates confrontations that are, emotionally captivating.
You did, where, you weren't a pushover, but you were effective at like laying, like kind of responding in the way that they would talk over people and that kind of thing. So I completely get, and I think that was, as a result, they were very annoyed about you being on the space, right? Mm-hmm. And you won't see that with pretty much any other left-leaning streamer that I can think of offhand. Maybe there are that I'm just not aware of. But the other part...
That's true, right? The left generally does not like to debate the right. But large sections of the right don't like to debate the left. I mean, Ben Shapiro says he's open for debate, that he just wants to talk facts and logic, but he won't debate substantial people on the left. Right? He will only debate morons on the left, generally speaking.
And the part that Matt, I think, is raising is that when I see people presenting it as if you and Nick are great friends, that's obviously not true. There's obviously like an ideological divide, and you can see it just if you listen to like you discussing things. But then...
Well, Destiny and Nick are primarily about cultivating an audience, right? They have a great deal in common. They're not people who optimize for truth. They're people who optimize for spectacle. They're people who optimize for numbers. They optimize for income. They optimize for grabbing people's attention. They don't put a priority on what is true, what is good, what will improve people's lives, what is pro-social, right? These are not their priorities. So they have a great deal in common. Why would they not socialize? Because they are both dedicated to the same thing, creating a spectacle and attracting as large an audience as possible by feeding the 100 IQ crowd what it wants.
When you hear you and Nick interacting about things like content creation, right? And talking about his community and how, you know, he's got a political movement, which he's...
Yeah, Nick and Destiny and Ben Shapiro, I mean, they are primarily about content creation. They're primarily about putting out content that will make them money, help them achieve status, achieve a large audience. They're not people who are optimizing for truth and for goodness.
He's taking steps, or Lauren Southern is making documentaries. She's got a good work ethic and that kind of thing. And that does then end up like feeling like, well, but Nick Fuentes at heart is an anti-Semitic, pro-theocracy, ethno-nationalist, right? So like people are correct when they're like his community building and stuff is to build a community which deserves disdain in a way, like because it's a hateful community. And I get...
Yeah, it's a hateful community in the sense that it's appealing primarily to people who are marginalized, people who are losing at the game of life, and who are looking for some sort of solace, right? If you have no accomplishments of your own, then blood and soil type of nationalism, ethno-nationalism is going to be highly appealing to kind of shore yourself up, because while you haven't accomplished anything, while you're consistently failing at the game of life, you get your sense of dignity from belonging to a particular race and from taking a marginalized position and then telling yourself, well, at least I see through the BS, right? I'm brave. You know, I have the hidden knowledge of how the world really works.
Yes, in that respect, you know, like you say, there's perfectly good arguments on both sides about the way to respond to that. But do you see much effect from when you engage in those? Because there's going to be the effect that like, it's content generating, it generates drama, and it gets attention in that respect. But do you see much effect from groupers completely leaving that ideology and becoming, more?
So the premise for Chris Kavanaugh's ponderous, lengthy question here is that this kind of outrage to the far right is only justifiable if you are making converts to the cause of the center-left perspective.
More moderate and that kind of thing, or is that too much to hope for when that is occurring? Because I'm sure there's isolated examples, but I mean, generally speaking, is it more on the side of generating content entertainment and less?
People don't change their politics over some convincing arguments, right? People's politics is a result of their identity and their interests, right? People want to belong to a particular type of community, and so they essentially align their politics with what's in their own social best interests. And people also are profoundly affected by their imprinting and their genetics. We have genetic tendencies, and we have tendencies from childhood to have, similar religious and political orientations to our family and to the people who we love the most. You're not going to encounter some argument that is going to send you in a completely different direction unless you have an emotional reason for going in a different direction. And then you're just seeking a pretext. All right. I was looking, when I encountered Dennis Prager when I was at UCLA, I was looking for a way to make sense out of life. I was kind of longing to get back to a religious perspective on life that was not my father's, right? I rejected the evangelical Christianity that I was raised in, but I was looking to get back to God and looking to get back to a perspective on life that gave my life dignity and meaning, even though I was so sick at the time that I couldn't accomplish much. And then as I was twirling around the radio dial, I found Dennis Prager, who provided the meaning and the arguments for God's existence and for a religious perspective on life that I was seeking.
Ideological like shifting, or where would you put the balance?
Well, it's really hard as a political person to ever draw a distinction between the two, because you can always make the argument that the stuff that gets me more views and is more entertaining will get me more eyes and is more politically effective, right? Like activism is theoretically more powerful the more people are looking at whatever you're doing. So that's a careful trap I have to not fall into, because there are a lot of things I could do to maximize viewership, and then I can like not even post talk. I could prospectively justify by saying like, well, listen, like I know this is going to be like kind of a sellout thing here to my values, but it's going to get so many eyes on me, and I can convert these people.
A sellout thing to his values. I mean, get real, Destiny. You deliberately create a nasty, spectacle-laden, performative show. I mean, what are your amazing values that you're trying to protect?
People later on, blah, blah, blah. So it is possible to bullshit yourself that way. I would say that when I'm looking at doing things with other people, there are two things going on. One is, I don't know if I'm changing my mind on this. I get attacked by so many people, it's pissing me off. But like, I try to give people credit where credit is due, regardless, because like Hassan is a workhorse. He works a fuck ton. He's really good at networking. And I try to give people credit where credit is due, so that when my criticisms come across to people that are more familiar with my stuff, it gives me a lot of credibility. Like one of the reasons why I can step into those spaces with Tate and Sneeko and.
So I've never deliberately sought out Destiny's content, but since I've been paying any attention to YouTube live streams, I think basically 2016, 2017, I'd come across Destiny. He always struck me as someone who was facile, right? Very easy at making arguments. But I never felt any sustenance there. I never felt that I was gaining much benefit, aside from just noticing his rhetorical techniques.
And have that Twitter call where I eviscerate these guys is because there are so many criticisms that you cannot make of me. Like you can't say I'm scared of being in these spaces. I've been on shows with all these people. You can't say that I run from challenging conversations. Tate runs for me. He's blocked me on Twitter. You can't say that I'm not capable of hanging in these types of communities. I will be in here and deal it as much as any of these guys can, right? The credibility building and the fact that I'm willing to give people props where they have it, I think makes it so that when I do make my criticisms, they stick a lot harder to people that are undecidedly in these communities, and to people on the other side. It allows me to.
People don't change their politics, their identity, primarily on the basis of arguments. Once they decide they want to change, then they look for justifications for making the change.
When I do convert people, they stick a lot harder because they didn't just hear like one good argument I said or one convincing thing. There's like a whole host of like, I'll give people props when they deserve them, and I'll attack them when they deserve them. So if you're coming over to me, it's because you've heard like a comprehensive criticism of a person, not just one thing that stuck well. And then I think it allows me to penetrate into some communities better, although it's hard to see it sometimes because people will still shout at me with the same things, because people are willing to give me that credibility. I don't come across as like some outsider, some woke scold who's coming in to fight with those communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the credibility thing is hard, is really hard to measure, because I mean, personally, I could just justify all sorts of horrible behavior. Like some people, because you could listen to me, like I just gave that thing on, I just said, well, here's the theory, but the application would be way different. Somebody could be listening and say, well, hold on, Destiny, you just said you hate it when people do that. Now you just gave the theory of building credibility. But what about when you say build credibility, that could be giving credit or criticism to a single person, but it could also be like saying the N-word on Twitter to gain credibility. Like, where does that start or stop, right? It's really hard in my mind.
Much of Destiny's live stream performance, from what I'm acquainted with, is really Jerry Springer level, shows of spectacle. So this is an awfully highbrow argument that he's making for Jerry Springer level content.
To balance all this out, because there are competing interests on both sides, where it's like, well, what is too much? And like, what am I doing that's just self-aggrandizing under the guise of like political effectiveness versus like what's actually politically effective, but also benefits me at the same time. And I'm not trying to play too much of that. Like, yeah, it's difficult to balance all of that out. So I'm like public about it. I talk about a lot of it because it is really challenging. I'm not doing this behind the scenes or secretly in some fucking room. Like, these are issues that I wrestle with on stream, in writing, on Twitter, like, almost every day, depending on what arc we're in. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think ultimately people have got to make their own mind up, because anyone can say that they've got these motivations, they've got these intentions. I mean, we've got our own set of things that we proclaim. Whether or not one should be believed. I mean, I guess you just have to make your own mind up. That is, people listening. The one thing where we are on the same page is like we will always hand it to the characters we cover.
Peterson.
Yeah, even when we really, really don't like them, just on principle.
Yeah, that does gain you credibility when you're able to recognize that people who you think are bad or making bad faith arguments are also doing valuable things.
Because I think it destroys credibility to pretend that they can't do anything good when they clearly have got at least this one or two things right. And if you want your other ones to land, then you need to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the United States has spent $320 million building a tier, a pier for Gaza aid. And virtually, none of it has broken through to Gazans.
You also open yourself up to very scary attacks to where cognitive dissonance only works insofar as when you're cognitively dissonant, you can change your mind about a thing to be more in line with reality, or you can change the way you perceive reality or change the reality in front of you. And oftentimes the reason why we can change how we perceive reality is because you're not usually tested on a lot of the social things that people try to lie to you about. But the further that gets away from the truth, the more of a mindfuck it's going to be when somebody's confronted with it. So like for my case, like if you've listened to things about me.
Okay, cognitive dissonance. So you usually change one or the other. So let's say you smoke and you want to quit smoking, right? If you're unable to quit, you will tell yourself it doesn't really matter that much if you smoke or don't. You will not keep going in a life where you're saying, look, I really should be doing X and I'm just not strong enough, right? Almost nobody will admit to that.
On the internet, I'm a racist, pedophile, Nazi Wikipedia reader who's like, screams slurs all the time and is an idiot, right? And the caricature of me that's built up is such that if I'm ever put in front of an audience and given the opportunity to like have a debate or well-reasoned discussion, there are a lot of people that I will pull immediately that will email me and they'll be like, holy shit, I saw like a full thing of you for the first time and it was completely not what I was expecting. I was like, well, yeah. But the issue there is there's a gambit that's being played on the other side where it's like, well, if I demonize this person enough, hopefully nobody checks his stuff out. But holy shit, if they ever look at it, they're going to see that the reality versus the expectation are wildly divergent. And it's a risky game to play sometimes, but it depends on how well you can perpetuate the exclusion of that particular figure. Yeah.
On that kind of subject, so you mentioned a couple of like the controversial takes and whatnot that are often cited with you, and we raised the DDoS kid earlier. DN.
Okay, so the DDoS kid was someone who was messing with Destiny, and Destiny was arguing that he wanted to kill this kid, and he still defends that attitude that he's essentially morally entitled to kill someone who messes with his livelihood. Right, back to December 28, 2017, Destiny debating with Jean-Francois Garapi, Andy Warski, Terry McCarthy.
Mixed race, at least in terms of the majority of our genome not being mixed race. These are arbitrary choice, and I recognize it. The reality of race is not the fact that there are X races. It's the fact that genetics in humans are clustered, and yes, they are clustered at multiple levels, at the very local level and very limited in time, like 100 years ago, and also at the very macro level, over hundreds of thousands of years, in terms of separated lines of ancestry developing over these hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay, I don't disagree with most of what you've just said, but this is not what most people that talk about race realism say. So when you say, for instance, that whether we divide into 500 or 600 races, that's something that I obviously can agree with you with. Different genetic clusters will lead to different types of phenotypes that can be classified in whatever way that you want to. When you speak to the idea that IQ is something that is incredibly complicated, it's the amalgamation of tons of genes scattered across the genome, that it's very hard to pinpoint, which clusters even contribute massively to intelligence or variance in intelligence. These are things that I would, of course, agree with. But the race realists don't usually make these claims. Usually the claim is we know for a fact where intelligence comes from. We know which genetic clusters can be attributed to intelligence.
Really? Which leading exponents of race realism say that? Again, he seems to rely on an awful lot of straw men.
Intelligence. And we can point to black people or white people and say that white people possess more of these genetic clusters that make them more intelligent. Do you recognize that most race realists would claim that difference in IQ between black and white people, that is a genetically intrinsic thing, that it's not something that's influenced by anything beyond like intrinsic genetics, the variation?
Well, you've listed a couple of things there, and I disagree with your characterization of what race realists say. For example, what I consider to be one of the best race realist speaker in the entire internet is Alternative Hypothesis. He does not state that we know the genes that underlie intelligence. Now, he does state that...
And if this is JF's idea of, a very intelligent race realist, I mean, he's talking about someone who's hyperbolical, emotional, incredibly volatile. I would not, put old hype in my top 500 people on this topic.
The gap in IQ that we observe between black, whites, and Asians is likely to be of genetic origin. Now, that's a different statement from saying that we know the genes and that we know how they affect the IQ through physiology.
If I may just butt in for a second and read some super chats here. I actually liked Destiny when he debated no bullshit and patty politics. However, now he just uses Talmudic tactics and acts completely disingenuous. White slave, $5. Andy, have JF say this, please, and listen.
Not see a problem with the statement that we haven't figured out exactly how genes can influence IQ, and we don't know which loci or whatever, like the heaviest IQ contributing genes are from, but we know it's the genes. That type of descriptive claim doesn't make you uncomfortable?
No, it doesn't make me uncomfortable because I know the scientific tools that allow us to make these claims. The scientific tool that allow us to understand that IQ is highly influenced by genes is twin studies. That's actually one.
Okay, so when JF just said IQ is highly influenced by genes, he's essentially admitting that there's also a substantial environmental component.
Of the tools. Twin studies allow you to determine if something comes from the genes without knowing what the gene is. Do you understand with this statement? Do you agree with this statement?
I would have to look at the specific twin study because it's not necessarily true.
Well, the function of a twin study is always the same. It's to distinguish the environmental effect from the genetic effect. And you typically do that by comparing monozygotic twins who have the exact same genes and dizygotic twins who only share 50% of their genes.
Yeah.
And so if you have two individuals that are literally the same individuals from the genetic perspective, and you raise them either in the same environment or different environment, you have essentially an experiment of nature. You have what happens to the exact same genes in two different conditions. Whereas when you have twins that are dizygotic, what you have are twins that do not have the exact same genes. And so you have an experiment where nature can have an effect on two people who are different at the genetic level. And so this allows you to tease out the difference. It allows you to tease out the effect, the percentage of effect that you could expect from the environment and the percentage of effect that you can expect on the trait.
Right. So here again, he's admitting that the environment is going to have an effect.
From genetics.
In an ideal circumstance, sure, depending upon your shared and unshared environment, sure, yeah. I mean, I understand that the theory behind like a twin study. I'm just not aware of like the definitive set of twin studies that have ruled that difference in IQ can be explained due to genetics.
Yeah, so these studies...
Well, this is a topic that is extensively studied, and the overall conclusion is that about 50% of the cause of intelligence is clearly genetic.
It's repeatedly shown that IQ is influenced by genetic, and that the percentage of variance in the populations that are studied by these twin studies is from 50% to 80% explained by variance in genes rather than variance in environments.
What is that study?
So here's JF back in 2017 essentially saying that differences in IQ are explained by environmental causes by something like 20% to 50%.
Or rather like a collection of them. I'll go look them up after because I'm not familiar with these.
Yeah, well, I can send you a link. The alternative hypothesis actually keeps a list of all of these studies. So
it doesn't.
Oh, well, my problem is twofold. My problem mainly lies in the normative claims, where people like JF or people like alt-hype will go on to say that ethnostates should exist. And these types of normative claims, I think, are really bad. Even if we were to see the entire descriptive claim that there is some difference between races that could be accounted for genetically, even if we assumed that, I think the normative claims are still bad. But I don't think the descriptive claims have been settled at all. Like, yeah, so it's even more damaging at that point.
But do you think that people just not talking about it would be better? Because, like, I mean, I know what
no,
you're
talking
saying,
about it is good. My first and foremost, my goal of everything is to find more truth, right? When I do research or when I have discussions, is to get closer and closer to claims that are true. And I think most people should value conversation that way. So I think there's value in discussing it. It's just that there's a difference between like, let me give an example and then two types of people that could approach this example, okay? Let's say that I was an intelligence researcher, okay? And let's say that I wanted to create a world where everybody was living together and working in the optimal way, right? Because when civilizations work together, we tend to thrive together. Typically, that's how human history has gone. So I start researching and I find, hey, okay, well, there are intrinsic differences in the way that
phenotypes are presented across populations of people. I'm going to use this understanding in order to help as many people as possible. For a real world example of this, we can use dyslexia, right? Dyslexia, if you had dyslexia a long time ago, it was pretty shitty. You're probably going to be a really shitty reader if you even learn to read or write. Whereas today, if we can identify a child early on with dyslexia, we change the education a little bit and they can read and write just as quickly as any normal person, right? So if I was coming at the research from a compassionate point of view, that would be my goal, okay? I can identify differences in races, that can be attributed to like an entire cluster of people, right? That I can find these and then I can use that information to better all of mankind. The problem is that people like Ryan Falk look for these differences and their ultimate goal is usually to exclude groups of people, that they want to forcibly remove people from populations. So they want to see people separated out from white people, that they want to create like a white ethno state that only has white people, and they want to try to exclude as many people as possible. And I don't think that path forward is a healthy path for the entire planet. It just doesn't seem to work as well when you've got countries that are fucked and destable and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like for sure, I want people like I started the stream by.
Okay, that's Destiny talking with JF and Andy Warski. Let's get back to Decoding the Gurus from 22nd of April. They did a 3-hour episode on Destiny. Here's the final part of their critique.
Guys, and it's not this high-minded thing. It's content, it's drama, and it's like making content with a...
Yeah, Destiny's shows are not high-minded, all right? They are primarily centered around drama.
Worst fucking people on the internet,
I'm telling you, you only focus on World War II because you're programmed to. Dude, you'll never talk about Stalin like that. Why?
Who do you think you're talking?
And then it also proves the point. If you're saying Hitler's the worst person of all time, but you're looking at all the other leaders that have caused genocide on other minorities, you don't see them as evil people, but Hitler's the most evil one. He's the genocide of the Jewish people.
Bro, you can't say you don't see them as evil people. What is that insane dichotomy? Of course they do. You don't have to
so why is Hitler the worst?
Because they led an unprecedented systematic elimination on Jewish people, on Soviet people, on the Romani people, on Polish people, on gay people, and
if people criticize him because of all the others, what group did Hitler genocide that people are really afraid about? Why do they say that Hitler's the worst of all time?
The two biggest ones are Jewish people and Soviet people. That's why Russia to this day defines itself.
Does anybody care about the Hitler genocide on Soviets? Nobody talks about that.
All of Russia's foreign policy. Why do you think Putin invaded Ukraine?
You're lying. You're lying right now because you and I covered Hassan Piker saying Hitler wasn't bad for invading Poland. He was bad for killing Jews, and you covered that and you changed your position.
Okay. Read the live chat more. Is that your notes? That looks like a live chat.
Okay. Adam 22,
read the live chat for more answers.
Adam 22, stop texting.
I want to reply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I understand. I can't square that circle of the platform or not to platform. I don't have a nice pat answer to that. But yeah, I mean, it isn't always the best thing to do, especially if you're very famous, to be spending time recording content with a white supremacist like Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, and Nick Fuentes is what's even the way to describe him?
Yeah, I mean, Nick Fuentes' primary identity is not white supremacist. That's just calling him a slur. Right? He's more like a traditional American prior to World War II.
He's, he wants a Catholic totalitarian state, ethno-nation state. He's a white supremacist. He's somebody that Alex Jones thinks goes too far in his right-wing ethno-nationalist. He was making jokes about the Holocaust and how many died.
Max says, if I take 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies and Cookie Monster has 15 ovens, working 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years, how long does it take Cookie Monster to make 6 million batches of cookies? I don't know. That's a good question. Certainly, oh, no. It doesn't really sound correct to me. Wait a second. It takes 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies, and you have 15 ovens, probably in 4 different kitchens, right? Doing 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years. How long would it take you to make 6 million? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't be 5 years, right? The math doesn't seem to add up there.
So Steve Saylor writes on his Twitter that Nick Fuentes fans are morons because so many of them have been engaging with Steve to say that the Holocaust never happened, which is obviously a moronic position. Holocaust denial, when I heard Nick Fuentes, was not a major theme of his shows, right? The
math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million, maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies. And I think the Red Cookie Association said something like that, probably 200 to 300,000 cookies baked. Probably. And in addition, in this hypothetical, I imagine that if you took aerial photographs over the kitchens, you would need to see certain smokestacks to release the smoke from baking the cookies, and the smokestacks would project certain shadows, but I guess they're not visible in the aerial photographs taken over the kitchens.
Like he's pure, edgy, right-wing neo-Nazi shit. But when Destiny interacts with him, so Destiny will say, when he's talking about it, that he's not there just having fun time with Nick. He's pushing him and he's arguing and he's kind of exposing his audience to counter arguments. But listen to these kind of interactions, which are from him discussing things with Nick. And I think this is why he gets accused of being pally. So he's talking about Lauren Southern with Nick Fuentes here.
I don't think he's talking about anybody relevant now. But
in the reverse, she weeded herself out as untrustworthy.
I guess because when I think of, because people always ask me, why do I talk to people like you or people like Lauren? People ask me this all the time. It's one of the biggest criticisms I get. And my response is that I respect you two because both of you are working on building real political projects. You've got your whole movement, you got a website, you do AFPAC. I respect that, even if I think your views are batshit insane.
just because you've built up a political movement doesn't mean it's worthy of respect. I mean, Nick has built up a movement of morons. How exactly is that worthy of respect?
I respect the work you put in, but I would say the same with Lauren too. Like, she did documentaries on topics when people are barely willing to do like prepared content on YouTube. And the fact that somebody would go out and like film stuff on the ground and do like a whole show. She did the shit about South Africa. However much I disagree with farmlands and that message or whatever, at least it shows like a commitment to a project.
Well, say what you like about Nazism, Chris. At least it's an ethos.
Yeah, like it's just because he's talking about content which is absolutely the most base, sensationalized, polemical bullshit. But he's can I respect the hustle? And I feel like that's not misrepresenting to say that he does do that. Like, he does call them out on their racist and ethno-nationalist beliefs and all that kind of thing. But like, there is an element of it where it's an elder content creator talking to a younger content creator, and like I've got an example of that dynamic.
Yeah, you can hurl out all these slurs and call people neo-Nazi or ethno-nationalist or theocrats, but whoever you're talking about, all right, we all just want to create the optimal environment for our own thriving and for the thriving of people we want. That's a normal, natural, healthy predisposition on the part of all living things.
You said she's not as much of a Nazi as she was before. I wouldn't characterize it quite that way, but you remember, years ago, she was in the fucking Mediterranean torpedoing boats of refugees. I'm exaggerating, obviously.
Yeah, and 5 years ago, I was on film saying shit like, I think we could kill conservatives and be morally justified. Nick, I know you don't believe this, but part of getting older is you kind of mellow out a little bit. And you're still young, you're 23, but I bet when you're 26, you're going to look back and you're like, you know what? Maybe this shit was a little bit too extreme, And again, like I said, maybe the Jewish thing comes down to 20%, maybe up to 25, but like, that's not a grifter thing. That's literally every single human being you talk to. When you ask any 30-year-old, you think you were a little bit crazy about some ideas when you were 25? Yeah, maybe, right? Everybody had a phase where they obsessed over Ayn Rand. A lot of kids today are having phases where they obsess over Marxism and non-binary, but like, you fucking grow out of it. You get a little bit older, you mellow out a bit, your temperament changes. That's like a natural part of aging. It doesn't mean you're grifting, and it doesn't mean your core political beliefs have changed.
Yeah, I just realized that Nick Fuentes was born in 1998. These are just kids.
He's a toddler, but it doesn't matter. Like, he's a neo-Nazi fucking toddler. But Destiny,
okay. But I guess the theme that I'm detecting is that Destiny treats everybody the same. Like, he's just as likely to have a sexual or romantic relationship with a fan as opposed to someone he met outside of work. He's just as likely to talk to Nick Fuentes and treat him a certain way as talk to Jordan Peterson or to talk to anyone left. Like, everybody gets the same treatment. And I guess that's the philosophy. Like, his philosophy is that he is a certain way and he has these certain, ethos or certain beliefs, and he applies it absolutely equivalently across all domains of his life and all decisions.
Yeah, and I feel like if we talk to him about all of this, we kind of raise these issues, he would maybe concede some parts, but like, I think he would stand by his positions, right? And in some respect, we are just saying, right, well, we have a different set of standards that we think are better. So we are expressing our position, and like, Destiny doesn't have to agree with it, right? Like, he can live his life out in the open with no boundaries. He can hang around friendly with neo-Nazis. He's not a neo-Nazi, right? I think that's anybody that is mistaking him for endorsing that point of view, like, he's not. And he is not somebody that doesn't.
So when you're working 12, 15 hours a day, right, your romantic pool is considerably shrunk.
I like researching. I like debating. I have huge interest in politics. I'm also like, a super sexualized person. I like to, hook up and sleep around with people. I like to do drugs sometimes. I think are super fun. I like cars. I like guns.
You've got one behind you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's just there's a lot of things that I enjoy. And yeah, I guess because my life is so open, I end up sharing all of these things. And sometimes it's confusing because it seems like you wouldn't associate some of these things with other people. Other people say that like, well, you shouldn't be so open about all these things. There are pros and cons to it.
So is that like part of the sort of package? Like, you're very upfront about, like, you run a business essentially, right? And you provide a product and you make money from it. And we commented on that. We found it quite refreshing because a lot of other people present themselves as something quite different. And, part of it seems to be that, people can engage with you on political topics, but can also engage and be a part of your, like, the real life, right? So those parasocial dynamics, which we experience too, being podcasters, are real, and they're not always negative. But is that part of the appeal? Like, how would you describe the product that you offer your audience, and how much of it is the drama and the personal beefs and things like that?
Yeah, I think when you come to my stream, I think there's a few things you're getting. One is uniqueness. So if you're listening to me give a take on something, this is my take on it, as opposed to there's a lot of progressive commentators where I could write the scripts for any take they're going to have. Like, oh, well, this came out, America was on this side, they're probably going to be against it. Or for far right commentators, a political topic came out, Biden said this, well, they're probably going to say that. They don't trust this or they don't believe this. If you come to my stream, I think you genuinely aren't, I don't want to say you don't know what I'm going to say because that makes it sound like it's a random or chaotic, but rather at least you know that I'm going to have my own unique individual interpretation of a particular thing. That's a big thing, the uniqueness. A second thing is, I think the authenticity. I think I hope I come off as a pretty authentic person. Again, there's so much information about me online, aside from even just all of the hours streamed. There's like people try to leak stuff about me or talk about me behind the scenes or whatever. And I think every single thing that has ever been leaked or every single thing that's ever gone has usually gone to show that I'm more or less, if anything, I'm like even more soft or generous. So yeah, I think the comparison is fair there. Now, obviously there's a loading of
the comparison to reality TV, right? Much of Destiny's show is the equivalent of trash reality TV
that makes it seem like it's not intellectual content or it's worthless. And when you talk about like the stuff I'm involved in dramatically, there's a large element of truth to that. I don't think your life is being enriched by, watching Mr. Girl and Lav, go back and forth for hours on stream, but it's funny as fuck. And not everything we do is for life enrichment. There are baser desires that we can fulfill. And I like to hop between those. I think it's fun. It gives me a variety of things to do. Admittedly, I don't know if this is an advertisement for medication, but since I've started my vyvanse, I've had very little desire to participate in that. So for about 7 months, my stream has been almost absent completely of any drama like that because I just don't have as much of an interest. Maybe that was like a thrill-seeking aspect of like a dopamine-starved brain. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was definitely entertaining and exciting. The intimate relationship thing with people in my field, that's a really interesting and challenging question to deal with. So here's an interesting thing. When you're a streamer, depending on the type of streamer you are, your life kind of revolves around your work. So like I'm streaming for, like my goal is to stream for 8 hours a day. I'm doing emails and messages before and after. I might be traveling for podcast appearances. And then I'm doing other stuff relating to upkeep of stream, whether that's management of employees, website, scheduling travel, negotiating like sponsorship, or like there's just a million things, like probably 14 hours a day. And anybody that's ever dated me will complain about this, is like going into work related stuff. So when that's the case, the people that are available to you to date are basically two types of people. It's either fans or it's either colleagues. So you're in an interesting spot because I remember when I moved to California when I was 30, for a couple years on Tinder, I removed all of my social stuff because I just wanted to meet people that didn't know everything about me. That was an interesting and fun experience. And for a while, it was fun to meet somebody and then get to like introduce myself to somebody again. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. But then there is like this wall that exists between us of like, I don't know how to explain to you that I'm a little bit irritated today because there's a guy online that tweeted about me being a pedophile and he got 20,000 likes and it's just really irritating. Like there's no way to make an ordinary person understand that type of struggle. Or like, yeah, like listen, this might be crazy, but like just because we appeared in a picture together.
Yeah, and so why do you attract people who claim you're a pedophile? Right? We have an effect on other people, right? We play a role in how other people react to us. So there are things that Destiny does by taking his show into the gutter that result in gutter level reactions. All right, let's get back to Decoding the Gurus. So what do I consider high level content? I consider Decoding the Gurus to be high level content. And here's an example.
Care about, any political views or that kind of thing. It's not like that either. So in many respects, I feel like he is saying, these are my positions. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to defend it, and I'm going to continue doing it. And other people can disagree. Other people can criticize me, but that's my judgment on stuff. Yep. And I respect that. I genuinely do respect, because he's not pretending to be something he isn't. Like, I don't get a lot of his orbiters and whatnot. They're all constantly psychoanalyzing about why he's...
Yeah, I do notice much less pretense with Destiny than most other live streamers. He does come across as someone authentic and honest.
Why he's doing anything and what he's motivated. And like, I don't find him particularly puzzling. In many respects, I see him as very similar to me in certain respects, psychologically, in terms of like becoming very hyperfixated on topics, enjoying debating things and going into, listen to arguments that he doesn't like and like kind of litigating things. Like all of this stuff I recognize in myself, in my own personality. And when he describes how annoyed he is by people kind of not being consistent or misrepresenting what they're saying, I feel that same frustration. But I don't share any of the characteristics which are the kind of enjoyment of dealing with interpersonal streamer drama stuff or making edgy takes or that kind of thing. So
yeah, well, Destiny was cleaning carpets before he became a full-time live streamer, right? Christopher Kavanagh was graduating from Oxford University, or he was on the faculty at Oxford University. All right, they have considerably different backgrounds, different credentials, and therefore different life paths that are open to them.
Yeah, it's just to say that, like, I don't think there's a big enigma at the heart of Destiny's content. Like, I think it's pretty much what it says on the tin.
Yeah, like it is what it seems to be. If it seems like he's living his life out in public, then that's what's going on. if it seems like he's having these very extreme kinds of conversations, whether it's about something that would normally be extremely personal, or whether it's talking to Nick Fuentes or whatever, then that's what it is. This is the content. What strikes me most is how at sea I am, I guess, in this subculture. Like, I think there is a generational thing, even if he's not that much younger than you. But this is a culture of people that have grown up with the internet, that have grown up sort of post-Groyper, post-everything, post-irony, everything. And now there is a great, I want to say flattening, I suppose. Like, he'll engage with everyone in the same way. He'll engage with Nick Fuentes and the arguments he brings to the table in the same way he'll engage with Ben Shapiro or a bipolar woman who's an influencer who he slept with, right? I see him engaging with everyone in exactly the same way and doing it publicly.
Well, to be clear, you mean like his kind of approach is similar, but he does match the energy to a large extent. So like if somebody is, more relaxed and not going personal and keeping things, at a kind of high level debate style thing, he does that, right? He doesn't automatically slip into, debate pro, the worst excess of it. So like in that respect, I feel he does modulate what he does, but the underlying color.
No, I didn't mean to imply that. Yes, he's certainly got very different styles that he could bring to bear, depending on whether he's doing a mainstream interview or it's a stream or he's having a debate. But I guess it's that ethos, which is engage with everything, sleep with everybody, talk to everyone and do it all publicly and stream it and then get everyone to talk about what we think of it.
He's talked about that being protective in a way, because like there's nothing he needs to really fear because he makes everything open, right? So like there's not going to be the Huberman style expose because it's all there, and like already on his streams with him talking to people about it. But I one other point that I would make about the ecosystems and the generational divide, like I am sure many people in our audience will be like, what the fuck is all this? What the fuck is this? But also,
my mum listens to this, Chris, so I don't know what she's going to think of it.
Yeah, but it's good to know this exists, and also because Destiny is becoming more mainstream, right? He's cropping up in Piers Morgan, debating with Ben Shapiro, having a debate with Alex Jones. I'm not saying he's mainstream Alex Jones, but that debate got attention, and I think that one aspect that's notable is his online community. We would be remiss not to mention this, Matt, because it's infamous, right? So his community is sometimes referred to as the Taliban, right? DTG, and he has a very active and large subreddit. And to give an example, when we posted on our Patreon that we are going to do Destiny next, within hours, that was screenshotted and on his subreddit with quite a few comments, at least by our standards, right? And that typically.
Okay, here's Destiny going on Will Cain's show.
No. With law professor and Fox News legal analyst Jonathan Turley yesterday. Plus, you can get exclusive interviews like those with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Tony Robbins by hitting subscribe to The Will Cain Show. Today, we have something unique, something that I would hope would be all the more common, and that is we have a conversation with someone from the left. In fact, he's one of the most prominent streamers from the left. He has almost 1 million subscribers on YouTube. He was previously incredibly successful on Twitch. He has gone viral for debates with the likes of Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens, Piers Morgan and Tommy Lahren. And he is joining us today here on The Will Cain Show. So let's get started with story number 1. Stephen Bonnell II, otherwise known as Destiny, is joining us now on The Will Cain Show. There's already a comment from someone named Pembroke here asking or saying, oh my God, Destiny at Fox News. That was not on my apocalypse bingo card. So Destiny, welcome to Fox News.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How does it feel to be in the belly of the beast? You made it all the way to New York City and you walked into 1211 Avenue of the Americas. You made it to the 15th floor and you're sitting in a studio at Fox.
Feels amazing, Just waiting to work my way up to... What? Never mind. I'm excited to be here. It's fun to be here. Yeah.
Work your way up to what? To Hannity? Work your way up to Newsmax? What do you want to say?
I was going to say to Sean Hannity, but I don't even know who works here anymore because I know Bill O'Reilly isn't here and everything, and I don't watch cable news much anymore, so I'm not sure. But whoever is still
well, listen, here. I don't know where this is going to go, and that's fine. I'm happy to see exactly where our conversation goes today. We'll talk about some of the news of the day. We'll talk about Donald Trump's trial in New York City. But let me just start with this, man. Tell me about yourself. Like, you have really risen. I think it would be unfair to say over the past couple of months, because over a decade now, you've been successful streaming on various platforms. So, what is it about you that is so willing and interested in talking to people like me? You're willing to engage and debate, where so much of the attitude on the left is you shouldn't platform people that disagree with you. You shouldn't debate because it gives credence to opinions that I would assume, at least in some cases, you and I will have very big disagreement, and you may even find abhorrent. So why are you so interested in debate?
I think there's three big reasons. I think the first one is that I grew up very conservative, and I come from like a debater type family. My mom is Cuban, and that whole half of my family are very much into shouting matches and screaming at each other. And afterwards, we're always cool, but that's just always been that kind of household orientation. And then growing up conservative has kind of given me a lot of insight into what a lot of conservative people think. It's not like, they just hate ordinary people, or, they hate women because of abortion, or they hate black people because of opposition to BLM or whatever. It lets me understand the opposing view a little bit more so I can counter it better. Second reason is because I came up in a very kind of brutal online era where the people online were incredibly mean to each other. So that kind of gave me the ability to talk to people in a very kind of rough way. And I would say around 2016 on the internet, most of the online political conversation was either like Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings types, or like very soft people on the left who didn't want to have adversarial conversations. So I had an advantage there. And then the third thing is I have a really strong commitment, I think, to a lot of the core democratic, liberalism ideas of freedom of speech and debate and marketplace of ideas and all that.
So not everyone's worth your time, right? Not everyone's worth your time in real life. Not everyone's worth your time online.
Success in relationships is emotional maturity. So being able to tell whether or not someone else is emotionally mature will save you a lot of headache and heartache. That means no more wasting your time investing in the wrong people. Here are the 8 signs of emotional maturity that you need to look out for in yourself and in other people.
I like this YouTube channel, Tips from a Therapist, Signs of Emotional
Hello,
Maturity.
everyone. My name is Tia, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I make videos that offer tips on how to improve your relationship with yourself and with other people. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you never miss more tips from a therapist. Today, I'm giving you the 8 building blocks of emotional maturity so you can tell who is and who isn't worth your time. The first is humility. Humility is basically being free of pride or arrogance. It's acknowledging the possibility that we don't have it right all the time. This is an incredibly
So Destiny does pretty well on this score.
useful tool in relationships because humility makes it safe for people to be honest with us. Without pride or arrogance, emotionally mature people are able to hear feedback with curiosity rather than taking it as a criticism. Humility allows us to categorize people with different perspectives than us as potential allies with important perspective that we should listen to and hear, rather than an opponent or an enemy that's just trying to harm you or attack you.
Okay, we don't need any soap. Did you just put soap on him?
Yeah.
You did. You put soap on him?
Humility makes us able to receive feedback from others without being defensive. This type of communication has more of a collaborative spirit. When somebody doesn't have humility,
Oh, it is so tiring being around people who are suspicious and highly defended. Ugh.
communication is often misinterpreted as conflict, and any type of disagreement regresses into a battle of who's right and who's wrong. Number 2 is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness is twofold. It's self-awareness of our internal world and self-awareness of our humanity.
And Destiny does well on this score too.
Self-awareness of our internal world allows us to understand what we're feeling and why. So emotionally mature people are capable of reflecting on their thoughts and feelings in a way that helps them better understand themselves. Now, this type of self-awareness allows them to identify what their needs are and what their priorities are and align their behavior with it. In relation to self-awareness of our humanity, sometimes people interpret self-awareness as knowing all the ways in which they suck. But emotionally mature people are able to be honest with themselves in a more balanced way. They're not overly critical or only seeing what they're bad at. They can accurately account for their strengths and good qualities too. But when someone lacks self-awareness, it feels very chaotic.
I'm coming off as stupid. You're wearing tuxedos to a job that requires you to clean bathrooms.
They don't understand their emotions, so they're dominated by them. They don't know what they need, so it's easy to blame other people and other things as why they're unhappy. Emotionally immature people can't see themselves or other people clearly, so their relationships can feel disconnected and fickle. Number 3 is empathy. Now, before we talked about self-awareness, empathy is more social awareness. It's putting ourselves in other people's place to understand why they feel the way that they do. Empathy allows us to attune, validate, and respond constructively to others. Emotionally mature people care about the impact of what they say and what they do. Without empathy, emotionally immature people can very easily abandon or lash out. They don't really.
So empathy is essentially goodness, right? You can't be a good, decent, upstanding, pro-social person if you lack empathy, right? If you have empathy, right, you're much more likely to be a good person to be around. Empathy means you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. This is abstract thought. The capacity for abstract thought is measured by IQ. Higher IQ people are simply more cognitively capable of feeling empathy, and on average, they're going to be more empathic, right? When you encounter a 130 IQ person, he is more likely to be empathic than a 100 IQ person, and he's more likely to be able to read what's really going on with you than a 100 IQ person. The smarter the person, the more likely they are to be able to read you accurately and to respond to where you're at.
Really think or care about other people. They only care about what they feel and what they need. And
right, higher IQ people are more likely to look for win-win solutions. Right, they're more likely to behave in a pro-social manner. Right, they're less likely to commit some, nasty crime against you. You're more likely to have your wallet returned to you in a high IQ area than a low IQ area. So essentially, IQ measures a person's capacity for goodness, for being pro-social. Now, you can have a high capacity for being a good person and not choose to exercise it. Obviously, there are horrible high IQ people. But on average, higher IQ people will demonstrate far more empathy than lower IQ people.
Everyone else in their life is just a means to that end. Number 4 is self-regulation. Now, self-regulation is just the capacity to manage distress in the moment.
And Destiny seems to show much more self-regulation since he got medicated for his ADHD with Adderall and now vyvanse.
And then process it afterwards. Emotionally mature people can experience emotions without them taking over. They're able to take their emotions seriously, but not too seriously, meaning that they feel their emotions just enough to understand where they're coming from and what they need, so they don't overindulge in their emotions. Without self-regulation, emotionally immature people will be reckless with their emotions, and whether it's externally on other people or internally spiraling within themselves. Emotionally immature people do not take personal responsibility for effectively managing their emotions. They'll either rely on substances to change their mood, escape into addictive or avoidant behaviors, or try to manipulate other people in order to change how they feel on the inside. Number 5 is accountability. Accountability is the follow-through of awareness and empathy. When we're accountable for ourselves, we advocate for our needs, we communicate and express our emotions in a healthy way, and we acknowledge our responsibility towards other people. Accountability with others means that we're bothered by our personal shortcomings and accept our duty to addressing them. It's acknowledging and taking ownership of the harm that we may cause, admitting fault, and pivoting in a positive direction. Accountability requires us to have a team effort in our relationships rather than feeling entitled for everyone else to adapt around us. Without accountability, immature people will act out their emotions, while emotionally mature people will articulate them. Now, when someone lacks accountability, somehow they will always be the victim, and you or someone else will always be the villain.
Good sir, you seem to be peeing upon my leg. Huh? Well, it seems to me that your leg's in the way of my peacery.
Number 6 is reliability. Reliability is the pattern of correcting personal wrongness. It's the practice of consistently taking accountability. Reliability is when someone's actions are evidence that something has changed for them internally. When someone is reliable, they're predictable. And when someone is predictable in a positive way, it makes them trustworthy. An emotionally mature person is a trustworthy person because they are consistent in how they manage themselves and their responsibilities with other people.
So I think a lot of people show up and spend an exorbitant amount of time online because in real life they feel like people just don't understand.
Accurate assumptions about you? Have you had to tell yourself or other people, if they only got to know me, maybe things would be different? If you answered yes, I know that you live in the profound pain and loneliness of not being understood. Too many people crave connection, a place, and people where they get to belong, but can't find them. Why is that? I'm here with 5 potential reasons. Hello everyone, my name is Tia and I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I make videos that offer tips on how to improve your relationship with yourself and other people. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you never miss more tips from a therapist. Today, we're talking about 5 reasons why people struggle to understand you. The first potential reason is that your outward presentation doesn't match who you are on the inside. And sometimes this is on purpose. When we are not comfortable with who we are, we tend to hide those aspects of ourselves from other people. We camouflage or conceal significant...
So a lot of people grow up in communities or families that don't appreciate them, and so they keep trying to be accepted, and they keep trying on different personalities, and it's desperate, and it rubs people the wrong way when you are presenting differently than how you really are.
Chunks of who we are, and people's brains don't really have a choice but to try and fill in those blanks. This protective mechanism has consequences, including being really difficult to understand. People can sense our trepidation, our hesitancy that we're not open, and they take that as a sign to give us some space. This could also present as us putting up a front in order to feel and appear different than how we actually are. Maybe we want to seem more confident, interesting, or informed, but it is very hard to fool an audience. Even the best manipulators leave some clues. People have a sense. They can typically pick up on an act, and they can feel when something is off. So rather than appearing like...
Right, so I was obsessed with what is good energy. That was a topic on my stream a couple of months ago, and a significant part of good energy is being authentic to who you are, not pretending to be something that you're not. People will find it much more relaxing and pleasant to be around you if you're honest and self-aware.
A better version of ourselves, we come off as being dishonest, which is also off-putting. And sometimes this mismatch is not on purpose. Most people are not trained in style and aesthetics or personal branding, so they're pretty ignorant to the vibe that they may be putting off. Or maybe it was just not something that they put much thought into. Either way, the outside doesn't match the inside and obstructs social connection.
So one of the most common critiques I hear about someone that makes you uncomfortable is that person's fake, right? You don't like hanging out with people who are fake.
The second reason people struggle to understand you is that you are not in alignment with how you would like to be seen by other people. And this is kind of similar to the first point, but it goes a little bit deeper. You may have flawed self-awareness. Your self-perception, how you see yourself and believe yourself to be, may not match how others perceive you. There's an incongruence, a misalignment with who you think you are and how you behave. Sometimes people think that they're being funny and charismatic, but really they come off as rude and obnoxious.
Hey, you're talking to my guy all wrong. It's the wrong tone.
Part of the problem may be that you don't know how you're coming off. In an effort to reduce bullying and to be more empathetic and compassionate towards people.
So if someone gives you some painful feedback, all right, in all likelihood, 20, 30 people have experienced and thought the same thing, but usually we just can't be bothered to give people painful feedback, all right? We don't want to expend that energy. We don't want to tax our own bandwidth. We just think to ourselves, they're not going to listen to us anyway. So it's highly valuable when you get some accurate feedback, particularly when you don't realize how you're coming across. And remember, for every time you get that sort of feedback, at least 20 other people have felt the same thing. They just couldn't be bothered to tell you.
Feelings, we have gotten less honest with each other. It is a delicate art to gently correct some.
Right. The more diverse we are, right, the less willing we are to confront other people and give them painful feedback. So to accommodate our increasingly diverse and litigious society, we have way dialed back on speaking accurately to other people.
Somebody, but there's that old adage, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Those good intentions to not hurt our feelings can leave us feeling stranded and confused as to why we aren't getting the reaction that we had hoped for. Or you could just be a hypocrite. You lack the integrity of being who you claim to be. And when people see that, they tend to keep you at arm's length.
Boom, roasted.
The third reason it might be hard to understand you is you're in the wrong place or with the wrong people. People are not always born in the place where they belong. Sometimes they have to seek it out. You could be the polar opposite of everybody you're currently around, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Plus, not everyone cares to understand everyone else.
I don't care!
It's impossible for everyone to like and be interested in everybody, and that's okay. We all have limited space in our lives and hearts that we reserve for how we choose. Some people are just not our people. Maybe you're a zebra among horses, but just because you don't see any zebras from where you're standing right now doesn't mean that they don't exist. Yes, everyone is unique, but you're also not so unique and not so strange that there's no place for you on this planet. go find the other zebras. The fourth reason it might be hard to understand you is that you value being different and unique. Some people like to be the zebra among the horses. They need to be different.
Yeah, that's me, right? Throughout my life, I have put more emphasis on showing how special I am rather than connecting and bonding with other people, and it has resulted in unhappiness and social exclusion.
And to stand out from other people. But there are consequences to this. You can't be exceptional without being somewhat of an outsider. They have a natural craving for human connection, but leverage themselves against others for their self-image. Yes, you should be your authentic self, and that will make you different from other people. But don't try to be so different from everybody that you alienate yourself. It is self-sabotage to rebel against a norm and then feel rejected by it. Some people are contrarian because being different is their identity. And if that's the case, you need to ask yourself this important question. What's more important to you? Being different, unique, and special, or connecting? They don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, but if you find yourself stuck here, it's because a part of you believes they are. So this may not be an easy question for you to answer. The fifth reason why it might be hard to understand you is that you don't know yourself. If you don't clearly know who you are, you can't expect others to. When we aren't grounded in our true self, we present in a way that's confusing and lacking in depth. People.
Okay, some good points from this YouTube channel, tips from a therapist. Like and subscribe, it's worth it. All right, back to Decoding, the guru's analysis here of the live stream of Destiny.
It doesn't happen. So that's like an activated fan base, right? And they're infamous online because people regard them as very, well, like maybe
like a swarm of bees. If you kick the Destiny hive, they will swarm you.
Right, and maybe people would say like hyper-autistic bees, or like anyway, very online bees, right? And I don't doubt at all that they have the ability to abuse people or make people's lives a misery. However, I will say, from my observation of that community, it is very much like they're not randomly going on campaigns against random people, right? Like they basically end up, feuding or criticizing people that they think are misrepresenting Destiny or are attacking him or doing things. So like Destiny will point out that people go online, like, we played some clips of all these people talking about Destiny in the stream, and there's many others that we could play of people, just completely crapping on him, talking about what a terrible person he is, what an abusive person and all that is. And then if he responds, they will immediately say he set his community upon me, right? Because I'm a smaller content creator. And so he makes a point. They can say what they want. He can't say.
All right, some good bits from Destiny's conversation here with Will Cain.
Ideologically has shown a historical consistency to the principle of free speech. It just so happens to be that the left controls almost all the mechanisms of power, certainly behind the scenes, and with that comes the protection of censorship. I would draw a distinction between Donald Trump suggesting he would sue the media in the case of defamation. It's probably impossible for Donald Trump to prove a defamation case. I mean, he's such a public figure, but I would think he'd have a legitimate claim in many, many cases about openly malicious and false statements towards him. I would distinguish that from, the government looking to impose upon private companies censorship when it comes to COVID or quote unquote election denial or whatever it may be. Those are two different approaches to censorship.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm not aware of any time the government imposed on social media, they said they had to censor something. I think a lot of social media companies, I think in good faith, we're trying to figure out how to navigate certain information environments, we'll say, where there's a lot of conflicting information coming out from a lot of different sources, and people are trying to figure out what is their responsibility to society, what are the ways that they can conduct themselves to keep people safe and healthy while still respecting, like user-generated content and everything else. So I think COVID was genuinely a very challenging time for people figuring out what it is they wanted to support or what they believed in or the types of values they should uphold, and then how that was competing against things like concerns over public health and whatnot.
Why you were kicked off? Was it because you hosted Nick Fuentes? Because you said something about trans athletes? I don't know why you were kicked off.
It was a lot of debates with trans people at the time. There are multiple ways in which you could talk about freedom of speech, and I'm glad at least you pointed out there's a difference between like the First Amendment restricting the government from creating laws abridging your right to freedom of speech, but there's also private companies and how they approach freedom of speech too. I think that private companies should be relatively open to a lot of different ideas, within whatever they feel is appropriate for their platform. I guess Twitch feels like the type of speech that I embody is not appropriate for their platform, so they decided to go in a way that doesn't include me. Obviously, I disagree with that. I disagree with that pretty heavily, but I mean, that's a fight that you have on either the personal, professional, or cultural level, which is a whole different beast than the government level. Personally, I'm on the left. I'm a huge proponent of capitalism. I'm a huge proponent of globalism. I think that the vaccines that the United States spearheaded is like the ultimate example of the union of government. It was Donald Trump and his Warp Speed program that pushed that as quickly as possible. It was capitalism. It was U.S. business and innovation that manufactured stuff or did the research and development. And it was globalism. It was us working with BioNTech in Germany. It was manufacturing those nanolipid particles, I think it might have been in Norway or Denmark. Like all of this was a really cool thing, I think, that came together with a lot of different forces. But because of how politicized everything is today, the right won't even take credit for when America does something well. And then obviously the left won't take credit for a lot of things the United States does well. I personally don't like Elon Musk or his politics a lot. I really don't like his politics. But man, the rocket stuff, it was really cool. SpaceX is really awesome. Watching the things come back to Earth is sick. And, regardless of if you think Teslas are not the best car or not the best build quality or have, Q&A problems or whatever, the Tesla cars have probably pushed forward electronic vehicles by like 10 or 15 years. At least I don't think anybody denies that. So yeah, I don't like that the politicization of every single topic has made it so it seems like neither side right now is willing to acknowledge anything good about the country. We're only willing to accept political truths that or fundamental truths that like jive with their political opinion. And I think that's a huge problem on the left and right now. We live in totally separate realities.
Okay, by the way.
All right. I think Destiny acquitted himself pretty well there on the Cain Show. Back to Decoding the Gurus.
Say anything back, and if like Hassan criticizes him and he says something stupid and people, he highlights something Hassan says, Hassan will say Destiny's obsessed with me, but they equally are mentioning him or they're feuding with him. And I do feel that there's a little bit where I'm not worried about the Destiny community coming after us, because even if they don't agree with our take, I feel like they will be fine that we have attempted to present them accurately. And they might take issue with various things or whatever, but I think they do end up, targeting people that are in the drama streams, that are doing all the feuds and stuff. But if you're not a part of that ecosystem and you're not going to be feeding drama content or sparring with Destiny on Twitter or that kind of thing, I don't think they really care that much, right? Like that's what I would say. It's like, I do think it's a big community. It can breed or, target people. But from what I've observed of them, it is very much part of that ecosystem where all the big creators have their communities, and Destiny's was one of the first, and it's one of the biggest. So that's in a way, it's kind of inevitable. And like when we've made a couple of videos or a couple of content that's critical of Hassan, we just get tons of response from Hassan fans, right? Like it's inevitable. It's inevitable in a way. So.
Yeah, I mean, one little thing that you mentioned to me, Chris, that I don't want to not mention is you mentioned a little episode with that he mentioned offhandedly about him paying his YouTube editor. What was the deal with that?
Yeah. So like on a recent interview with the Iced Coffee, he was talking about his YouTube channel or whatever, and he.
So my website is where I have my own subs and people can donate through there. I think on that I make about $250,000 a year. I think is what I made last year. They were on Twitter.
Is that like an email thing? Or
no, it's just you go to Destiny.gg and then you can subscribe there. You can donate there. It runs as its own completely side like chat and ecosystem or whatever.
Oh, so you stream on there as well?
No, it's just an embed from like YouTube or Twitch.
Oh, okay.
Well, not Twitch, but yeah. YouTube ad revenue is really good. I probably run like anywhere from 40 to 60,000 a month off of that. And then I've got like 2 other channels that make around like 20 to 30,000 a month. I pay like 45% of all that ad revenue goes to my my YouTube editor, who's definitely overpaid. August. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow, $45,000 a month he pays to his YouTube editor.
In the United States, we're awesome because of our entrepreneurs. We're awesome because of a whole bunch of different things that make America a unique place. But I think that part of what allows this to happen are the institutions that we have. The idea that I can start a business and I can sell food to people and I.
Right. So most of our institutions are dominated and run by the left or the center left. Still, compared to what other country do you think has superior institutions?
No, the food is probably going to be safe. We have an FDA that regulates that I have the right to start a business and sell goods and services to people across state lines because the federal government says that everybody has to use the same currency. I don't have to worry about any weird interstate crossing the borders or doing anything. I know that if I do business internationally, there's a coherent like federal government that negotiates in terms of like trade and tariffs and everything, and they unilaterally can do that. I know that there's a lot of things the federal government provides and ensures American citizens that allow us to thrive in the way that we do. As much as I love America, I don't believe that American stock is like inherently genetically better than any other stock around the world. However, I think that the combination of all the people that come here to pursue what we have, combined with our institutions that safeguard and allow for that flourishing, I think it's that unique combination of things that have allowed Americans to flourish. And I don't think we could have gotten as far as we could have without our institutions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those are solid arguments on behalf of American institutions. All right, back to Decoding the Gurus.
If you've been streaming for whatever 15 years, you're doing it for 10 hours a day, there will be stuff, right? Certainly I found myself getting a bit loose at the end of 3 or 3 hours of recording, and we go, okay, that's enough. So
you've never, yes, you have, but there are levels.
There are levels. But I was going to say, if you put the drama and the scandal type stuff aside, and you just look at the more substantive political points or commentary that he's doing, because he is a professional pundit, then he does a pretty good job of that. Like just on a purely intellectual level, most of it is pretty reasonable. Not to say it's perfect, not to say I endorse it, but compared to most of the gurus we look at, he's of higher quality. He's certainly so much smarter than someone like Hassan Piker or the Red Scare people or other people that at least mentally are put in the same ecosystem. So in the end, Chris, I don't know what to think. It's just been an interesting journey to get to know someone that's living in a different world in a very different way from me.
Yeah. Well, before I get to my wrap up, I'll just play a couple of final clips. We've had quite a few, but there's a few more to finish off with. And most of these are actually a little bit more positively tinged. So maybe, a positive note to end on. One, I think, is slamming academics, which and with some justification.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, let's hear what he has to say about people like us.
When I have to argue against a lot of these people, I've spent a lot of time reading research, reading studies, spending time on Wikipedia, figuring like I've learned so much shit because it's not my area of expertise, right? And
yeah, Destiny's obviously very smart. He appeared with Ben Shapiro on Lex Friedman's show.
There has to be some diplomatic bilateral communication there.
No, what has to happen is the containment of Iran.
History moves in one direction, right?
Why?
Because of time.
Communism, Nazism, all of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So I don't.
This is one of the areas where we get into this. I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden.
Joe Biden literally used the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans. That's insane.
What about supercalifragilistic? And then you're
what about pneumal ultramicroscopic?
Yeah. Or the science terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what about the 7,000 letter thing that's from part of biochem?
I got my education in the Soviet Union, so we just did math. One of the big issues in this presidential election is going to be January 6th. It's in the news now, and I think it's going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. So, question for Destiny first. Did Donald Trump incite an insurrection on January 6th, 2021?
Absolutely. This is probably ignoring every other issue we've talked about, of which I think there are plenty that I would say disqualify Trump from holding office. I think that the conduct and the behavior leading up to and including January 6th.
Yeah, I would agree with Destiny here.
I think is wildly indefensible. I am excited to see Ben try to the 3 to 4 stages are the taking what I think any reasonable person would say knowingly false information about elections being rigged or ballot boxes being stuffed or Ruby Freeman running ballots 3 times in Georgia, taking that knowingly false information and trying to call state secretaries and stuff to have them flip their electoral vote. That was horrible. The plot that Eastman hatched in order to have these like false slates of electors where all 7 states had citizens go in and falsely say that they were the duly elected electors that could submit votes to Congress. That was insane. That happened. Asking or begging Pence to accept these false states of electors initially and then just say you should just throw it out completely and throw it to the House delegation, which was majority Republican. That was absolutely unbelievable. And then on the day of January 6th, trying to capitalize on the violence by him, Giuliani, and Eastman making phone calls to senators and congressmen saying, well, don't you think maybe you guys should delay the vote a little bit? Don't you think they're just really mad about the election? I think he said to McCarthy, they're more upset than you. And his utter...
Comment in the chat is Destiny lost weight. Yeah, he's been on Adderall will ADHD stimulant medication will help you lose weight.
Dereliction of duty and not doing anything to stop the rioting that happened on January 6th because he was too busy taking advantage of it. I think all of these things are horrible. I look forward to seeing the Jack Smith indictments play out in court, maybe even the Georgia RICO case. But yeah, I think all of these things are unfathomable. And I think when you look at the plot from start to finish, clearly the goal the entire time was to circumvent the peaceful transfer of power. That was the goal from start to finish, whether it was through false claims, whether it was through illegal schemes, or whether it was through violence at the Capitol to delay the certification of the vote.
Ben?
Yeah, I would agree with Destiny there.
Donald Trump's only allegiance is to Donald Trump, right? We agree on that. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
I don't think it's the only thing he cares about. I think it's certainly the largest thing.
It's the largest thing he cares about, right? So you've got a man who only cares about himself.
Well, not politics. I mean, it may be more.
But that's not even.
It may be more with Trump, but it's certainly not unique to Trump.
I think that the issue with Trump too, though, is I think he's even a threat to the Republican Party, in which I think you would mostly agree with me. Maybe not overall, but on every individual point, Trump picks bad candidates. He has no concern for the future of the Republican Party. Like, for instance, I think there is a chance. I don't think it'll happen because of the polling looks now. But if Trump didn't get the nomination, I think Trump would say screw it and run as an independent because he thinks he can win or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think this is pretty accurate criticism of Trump. I wouldn't say the only thing that he cares about is himself, but he is incredibly childish.
I doubt that he would do that, but theoretically
possible.
He could.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
Trump he was really content to throw Georgia, the 2 runoff elections under the bus because Raffensperger didn't support him for the election.
So what is all this in service of? What's the generalized argument that you're making? Do you believe? I'll go back to my question. Do you think that if Trump wins, there will be no more elections? Is that like what percentage on it? What percentage do you think that's a reality?
If Donald Trump wins, I think there is a 100% chance that he will try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. In terms of would he succeed?
I can guarantee you he will not do that.
Why is that?
Because he's in his second term and he's no longer eligible, and he will believe he won and he will leave.
Yeah, but hasn't Donald Trump himself joked about running for a 3rd term? I think that having a 3rd term.
What has Donald Trump not joked about? I mean, for God's
I don't. Okay, hold on.
if you want to prevent him from creating a revolution, you probably should actually just appoint him president and then he can't run again.
Here's another broad argument that I don't like in favor of Trump, and this was brought up earlier in terms of like we talk about like not grading presidents on a curve, but then earlier we said we take Biden's rhetoric.
Oh no, I
seriously
totally grade.
Trump's.
I 100% grade presidents on a curve. Are you kidding?
Oh, okay.
I grade pretty much everybody on a curve.
Then I feel like
I don't treat my 7-year-old the same way that I treat my 9-year-old.
Sure, but
And
I don't like that
Obama.
it feels like we're treating Donald Trump like a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. I think we should treat him like the president of the United States. I don't think having a president that has taken like concrete steps to prevent the transfer of power, which he did with the electorate sham, which he did with Pence, and which he did with trying to capitalize on the J6 violence, a president has taken concrete steps towards cooing the government, essentially. I don't know why that guy, we'd say, well, you know, it's Trump, he does Trump things. The guardrails held, I'll probably hold next time.
I mean, when we say we shouldn't, do you mean that he should be actually barred from office?
I'm just talking about support from. I don't even think Republicans should support Trump. You lose your incumbent advantage. The guy's obviously self-destructive. He's destructive to the political party itself. Like,
Do you think he should be on the ballot? You think there's a case to be made to remove him from the ballot?
I think there's a case to be made, but man, the phrasing, for as much as our governmental founding fathers and everybody else, you know, wrote nice amendments and wrote nice the Constitution, some of the phrasing is very, very, very bleh. And the Section 3, the not requiring any type of actual conviction. I don't have a strong feeling on it. I will say I'm very interested in reading the majority opinion from the Supreme Court. I seriously doubt the Supreme Court is going to uphold that states should be able to decide if they leave them off the ballot or not. I think for the political future of the United States, it's probably not healthy that the leading opposition candidate is now going to be barred from the ballot. It's probably not healthy for us. Because then what?
You want to talk about threats to democracy? That would be a pretty serious one. Applied across the board, by the way.
It would be. However, like that threat to democracy was earned by Donald Trump and the conservatives that supported him. I think conservatives made a dangerous gamble when they threw Trump into office, and now like all of the fallout from that is something that we all as Americans have to deal with.
I mean, I think that the unprecedented legal theory that a state can simply bar somebody from the ballot on the basis of, in an informal way, believing that he is quote unquote an insurrectionist is pretty wild. I mean, that
we can say it's pretty wild, but there is an amendment in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, that says that if they have engaged in this, they shall not be, or you shall. I don't remember the phrasing because it doesn't require conviction, but it's a self-executing, arguably thing.
If we're getting into constitutional law, I mean, there are a number of provisions that suggest that this is, number one, not self-executing. I mean, minority opinions in the Colorado Supreme Court case are pretty thorough. The number one contention, which is that this is not self-executing because other elements are not self-executing, that ignores subsequent actual law that happened. I mean, the Congress passed a law, for example, in 1872 defining who was an insurrectionist, who was not an insurrectionist for purposes of elections. In 1994, Congress passed a law that specifically defined insurrection as a criminal activity so that somebody could theoretically be convicted of insurrection and therefore ineligible to run for office. It is unlike, say, the analogs that are used by the majority opinion, like age. Obviously, this is not the same thing. We can all tell what somebody's age is by looking at the birth certificate. I can't tell whether somebody's an insurrectionist without any reference to a legal statute or definition of the term.
I would also be careful with that because remember, one of Trump's first like big political actions was challenging Obama's birth certificate.
Well, and I thought that was dumb at the time. But
Sure. I like that you both said 100% chance that Trump will try to go for third term and 0% chance, which statistically.
Third term, he's done, man. Are you kidding?
You would want to.
Trump's going to walk around hands up high. He's gonna be like, I'm a two-term president. I'm the only president since Grover Cleveland. But since Grover Cleveland, who served 2 non-consecutive terms, I kicked Joe Biden out of office and I kicked Hillary Clinton out of office. Dude would be like, he'd be living large. Are you kidding? He doesn't want the presidency anymore after that.
I just think that I think it's scary that like Donald Trump, it feels like for all of the accusations that are made sometimes against Democrats, like Biden is ordering Garland to investigate Donald Trump and blah, blah, blah. It seems like Donald Trump would actually do that with his DOJ, would give them orders.
He didn't. He didn't.
Well,
he
kind of did though, right? So for instance, with Jeffrey Clark went to Rosen and Donahue and said, hey, listen, I need you guys to sign off on a letter that we're going to use essentially to bully states into overturning their elections by saying we found significant election fraud. And part of that threat was Jeffrey Clark saying, listen, if you're not going to do it, Rosen, Trump's going to fire you and just make me the acting attorney general. That was the threat that he carried. And I think Trump repeated that threat in a meeting later on that was, I only rebuked when I think like half the White House staff said, if you do this, we're resigning.
Okay, so that's a slightly different topic because now you're getting into all the election shenanigans and all this. But
Trump saying he threatened to fire his acting attorney general if he wouldn't carry the same platform, essentially. Like, if Trump could order his DOJ to do something, would he? It's not beyond the pale for him, right?
It's not beyond the pale for him to order them to do it, and then it's not beyond the pale for them to reject him doing that, which is the story of his entire administration. Whereas Joe Biden orders his DOJ to do things, and then they just do them.
Well, I'm not. We can get into specifics there. This
is one of the big problems that I have with, I mean, for example, all the talk about Trump tyrant, Trump executive power. I mean, Joe Biden has used executive power in ways that far outstrip anything.
Every president has been stretching executive power.
I mean, Joe Biden is going Joe Biden has gone well beyond anything Trump even remotely attempted to maintain via just pure executive power. And actually, Trump's use of executive power is nowhere near even what Obama's was.
I mean, Trump's inability to get border policy passed literally had him using executive power to march the military down to the border to do border policy. I mean,
Joe Biden literally used the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration to try to cram down vax mandates on 80 million Americans. That's insane.
Sure,
he literally said, I cannot relieve student loan debt, and then tried to relieve hundreds of billions of dollars in student
but what
loan
happened
debt.
to that?
It got struck down by the Supreme Court, and then they still did it. Biden brags about it.
For what he was able to relieve, which I think were related to particular types of student loan debt. But I'm just saying that the guardrails are holding with Biden as much as they're holding with Trump. The only difference is that once Biden exhausts his executive power, he's not running around lying to people or trying to extort people or trying to and concoct insane schemes.
Well, I mean, so here's the way I would think of this. Think of the guardrails holding as the filter.
Sure.
Okay, meaning the coffee is in the filter, some of it, what you want is going to get through, and all the stuff. The guardrails prevent the other stuff from getting through. Now the question becomes, what liquid are you pouring into the filter? Okay, meaning, so if a filter exists, if the guardrails hold, and if Donald.
Okay, pretty fair discussion on both sides there between Destiny and Ben Shapiro. Pretty good faith discussion. All right, conclusions here from Decoding the Gurus.
All this research that I'm doing, like all this, every time like a new conspiracy theory comes out, like I have to like do more reading and more research to get like a handle on like immunology, viruses, like all this shit. I wish that people in the academic world spent a little bit more time on public outreach, because I don't think that like the job should be left to people like me to do it. All of my ability and bonuses and stats in life are on this kind of like rhetorical and argumentative side, and I'm pretty smart, so I can do the research too. But goddamn.
Well, not all academics are suited for public outreach, right? Their prime responsibility is to do research.
Like, rather than me, who's really good at debate, trying to research my way up there, why not take a guy that's really, really well researched and then have him just like practice a little bit in terms of debate or conversation? I've seen the Hotez guy talk before, and I don't think he would be the good choice for that RFK debate. He seems pretty knowledgeable, but he doesn't handle himself very well in conversations. So I wish that more academics would practice that outreach, because at the end of the day, if whatever you're studying in academia, dies on the walls of your classroom, what's the point of anything you're doing, right? You might believe all of this and can prove all of it, but nobody in society does. What value do you have to anybody? Yeah, that's very frustrating to me.
So you think the debate should happen?
I think the debate should happen, but you need to find academics who are more...
What do you think of that, Chris?
Well, he was talking about like Joe Rogan and the Peter Hotez debate about vaccines, and I do agree with him. Like, first of all, he's making clear his limitations and that he recognizes them, that he's not an expert in these topics. Like, he does do research. And I would also make this point that relative to streamers and many of the people he's debating with, he completely wipes the floor with them in terms of research, because he just does basic research, right? And he checks up sources and he writes out points and that kind of thing. And it sounds really basic, but it's actually rare in that arena. So he is correct that he's good at debating, and that academics, by and large, including people that are much better versed, aren't good at that, right? And so he is right. Like, if it would be good if more academics trained a little bit in how to debate or how to present things, and were willing to do so. But the bit where I slightly disagree is he says, what's the point if you're just in a classroom, teaching people about things? Like, what difference does that make? And the answer is, well, that is the reason that you have doctors, and like most academics are not. Like, what they're actually doing is teaching the fucking subject that they've mastered.
Yeah,
like,
that's right. I saw a similar comment, which was that, the academy should start valuing like book sales instead of just valuing, you've done an academic publication that was maybe read by a handful of people. And on the surface, that seems to make sense, right? A book that's influenced 1 million people is far more important than some niche academic thing that's hit 10 or 20 people. But that's the nature of specialized expertise. Sometimes when you're researching something like mRNA vaccines, then actually your empirical work just needs to be read by the 10 or 20 other people that are working on that specific area. And in the end, what you're looking to do is to generate knowledge that's going to inform some technology, or indeed train specialists in a very particular area. You're not trying to educate the entire world about the nuances of exactly how this thing works. That's not to say that isn't an important role, and I think it is important for anti-conspiracy, anti-vax people like Destiny, who is like a Swiss Army knife. Does, like you said, he does far more research than your typical online personality. But you can still only be superficial in a way, because you're a jack of all trades. You're debating a different topic every week or two. But I think there's room for both. And if people like Destiny or anyone in his position can simply access good information from, say, vaccinology researchers like we've had on our show, Chris, they can consult with them, right? They can get, he's good at debating. Yeah. They know about vaccines. They can either read their articles, their more popular articles, or even consult with them like you and I have done. And you can have both sides of the coin sorted out.
Yeah, and I'm more concerned about academics who, what Destiny talks about.
So JFGT, he's done postdoctoral neuroscience research at Duke University. You think that he would be at least Destiny's equal when it comes to research, but often Destiny's choice of what he researches and how he summarizes it is far more accurate than what JF does.
But they're like maxing up their social media or presentation competencies. It's basically you run the risk of generating a Huberman. Right?
Yeah,
like
or a Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah, so be careful what you wish for. but on the other hand, Debunk the Funk, Dan Wilson, very good communicator, great knowledge. So, there's plenty of people that adapt to this role, but Destiny is right that, like, there are not so many people that can do what he does, especially engaging with people that are very, very rhetorical. And he mentioned there that his skills are in rhetoric and argumentation and debate, right? Like,
yeah. He's very upfront about what he's good at and what his limitations are, and I do like that.
He doesn't like to be dismissed as a debate bro and accused of just doing rhetoric, because he points out that people are often, like, they don't explain what that means, and they kind of, they just reference that he reads Wikipedia or whatever, as if like that means that he has no knowledge about topics. But in most cases, like, going to Wikipedia first as a reference for a topic, it is a good jumping off point, and it is a place that gives you like resources. And if you only read a Wikipedia article, yes, that would be a problem. But as a starting point, it's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. And look, and I do sort of agree with his more fundamental point, which is that academics generally, scientists, whoever, we need to make a little bit of space in our lives for that, making an effective conduit between specialized evidence-based scientific knowledge and the general public. You don't necessarily have to be a master debater, as they say. You don't need to be good at public speaking or giving catchy slogans and stuff, but you can be part of the conduit. And unfortunately, academia doesn't reward academics for doing that most of the time. So, it's fundamentally right.
Yeah. And so another clip, Matt, of him talking a little bit about his process. You know, he was talking about his views can't change. He's mainly about trying to develop a process for, you know, like critically evaluating sources and locating information. And I agree with that. That's all good. But he talks a little bit about ways that he might challenge his views or try to pressure test them.
So this process might include, can I find views that I had on this 6 months ago when I was in a less emotionally charged state? Would I still agree with those views, or was it different then? Maybe I'm letting my emotional state dictate how I feel now. How would I feel if somebody posited this argument on the right, somebody that is a political opponent of mine, were to try to posit this argument? Would I still agree with it? I might think... I might try to think, like, what would it take to convince me out of said position? Like, what are some arguments that would be good arguments and counter to mine? Oftentimes what I'll do is actually take out a little notepad and I'll start like jotting down, like, this is what I believe about this, blah, blah, blah. I'll write all the arguments, I'll write the counter arguments, I'll try to write the counter arguments, and then I'll go back and forth until I feel like I've reasonably, like, weeded out, like, my position. Like, I understand not only arguments for, the arguments against to a great degree. So I spend a lot of time auditing my own thought process. Whenever I go through, like, big ordeals like this, I usually take a step back and I try to think, like, okay, well, what just happened? Why did it happen? Why did the communities react the way they did? What can I do to change that, if I do want to change that?
Yeah, that seems pretty accurate. Seems to be how Destiny works. He does think things through in a far superior and more clear way than 99% of live streamers.
That sounds like a much more reflective person than like a Brett Weinstein. Remember Brett Weinstein talking about how he checks himself? And he basically says he asks Heller and Eric, a little less so Eric now, or he speaks to his anti-vax friends.
Yeah,
but Destiny's talking,
or he checks whether or not everyone else disagrees with him, which is proof that he's right. Yeah,
right. And Destiny, as we've seen, he is not somebody that is willing to give up unpopular positions just because, you know, they're unpopular.
They're a bad look, or a bad hill to die on.
Yeah. Like, so he will take unpopular positions, but what he is describing here, it is an academic style process of like considering counter positions and trying to think about what would be your position if like the facts changed on this or that. Like, yes, it's good debating tactics in general to know, but it is good epistemic practices, I feel. Like and I don't think anything there is disingenuous. Like, I think that is how
that's what I was going to say. If I heard one of our other gurus say stuff like that, I would perhaps suspect that this is stuff that they're saying as a self-presentation thing to make them sound good. But I mean, everything we know about Destiny seems to be that, you know, whatever his faults are, he does seem to be entirely authentic in everything that he's saying and doing. You know, disagree as I might with his methods, with his choices, and certainly some of his opinions, he doesn't seem to be someone who just says stuff because it sounds good.
Yeah, and so just to say as well, Matt, you know, we can contrast this exactly. Remember the clip that we always play of Eric and Brett saying, if everybody's telling you you're wrong, that's how you know you're over the target and you're right. And that feels great, right? That feels like you're doing something right. And
weirdly, I think that weirdly enough, they're being authentic too. I think it's just that they're direct.
Yeah, well, they are being authentic, but compare that to this sentiment.
Let's talk about this real quick. So my position on who can achieve what, I think genuinely that most people in society can become 99th percentile at any given thing if they put...
Right, that's absolutely absurd. Just completely removed from the evidence, right? We're born with different gifts, right? The idea that any of us could become 99th percentile, all right, at something, if we just put our will to it, is absurd.
Their like mind and attention to it. That you could take the dumbest person off the street, throw them into a studio for an hour a day, and in 1 year they'll be a pretty good piano player, like a surprisingly good piano player. That people can reach a surprising level of competency in any given...
Yeah, just completely wrong. Playing the piano, for example, takes considerable cognitive skills. It's about the highest IQ instrument.
Ability in any given field within reason, right? Obviously, a quadriplegic isn't going to be a 100-yard dash or whatever, but like within any given field, I think people can become like surprisingly competent. I generally extend this view to myself. I don't think that I am exceptionally intelligent. I don't think I was gifted or born with some kind of...
He is exceptionally intelligent. He's top 1% in intelligence.
Manager brain or some master high IQ. I think that I just have a pretty good set of tools for evaluating, you know, what beliefs are good, what beliefs are bad, and then I try to adhere to that. Anytime I step into an area where a whole bunch of people are telling me that I'm wrong about something, and I insist that I'm right about something, one thing that I have to accept, if I want to be intellectually honest, is there's a good chance that you're incorrect rather than you're correct and all of those other people are incorrect. So when I'm in an area where I have multiple communities saying, hey, Destiny, you're really fucking wrong about something, there's a huge process that I have to go through, a pretty big introspective process I have to go through to figure out, like, well, hold on, like, am I being full of shit right now?
That's I mean, it's normal. What he's describing there is just a normal human reaction.
Now, these two hosts are psychologists. They should be able to point out that what he said, that anyone can become 99th percentile, is completely absurd, completely removed from all evidence that we have, that people are born genetically and through early imprinting with certain gifts. And no, you just can't become 99th percentile, right? Top 1% by virtue of hard work.
But the point I want to contrast that with is the normal reaction that we hear expressed by, you know, the guru figures that we cover. You know, and as we've talked about, Destiny still strikes out positions which are unpopular or that, you know, put him in a different position than a lot of people. But the point is, when he's doing that, I think he genuinely is putting time and effort into it.
Yeah, I think he's being genuine also in what might sound like being self-effacing, saying that, you know, I don't think I'm so good, I don't think whatever. Like,
Yeah, he may be genuine, but it's absurd. I mean, the guy's top 1% in intelligence. These hosts of Decoding the Gurus are psychologists. They should be able to point out that what he was arguing is absurd.
I think how he views himself is true, which is that he's someone who's done essentially a very specialized job for many, many years, and he's worked at it just like anyone, who specializes in something, works at something, and he's done his 10,000 hours? What's the number of hours he's supposed to do to get good at something? And he thinks he is good at it. But
come on, guys, you know that 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell book is absurd. You don't become good at something just because you've worked at it for 10,000 hours unless you already have some unique skill.
Rightly so. He is good at debating and so on, and it's because he's worked at it, not because he's some polymath or some.
That's absurd. All right, the reason that he's so good at debate is because he's so smart, and that he's worked at it has played a role in addition to those inherent genetic gifts.
Yeah. This is one thing that I would say that a lot of the people that criticize Destiny's performance in like a debate with Jordan Peterson or whatever, they vastly overestimate how they would perform in the same situation. Like Destiny performed very well in his recent debate with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and other figures. Like I do feel that there's a lot of backseat driving from people who, imagine that they would have the response for every point and that they would hold someone's foot to the fire, and like it just wouldn't work. Like especially with figures like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, because they would just steamroll as well. Yeah, I think people overestimate how much they could do what Destiny does better than him. I don't think most people could. I don't think I could do better than him in most debating circumstances.
You would only do better. You would only do better than me. That's all.
Yeah. So that I think that's just something to say, right? I don't think he'd be as good as doing statistical analysis.
Yeah, when it comes to debate, Destiny's better than 99.99% of people. Right? Probably only one person in 100,000 would be as good at debate as Destiny.
So it's all relevant, all relative. But unfortunately, I'm not as good as you. So last two clips, Matt. Last two clips. And again, just a contrast with another figure that we covered. You remember Constantine saying that poor people don't give a crap about the environment, and they're just like caring about how to live.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There are certain social issues that will drive every strata of society. What do you think that is? Well, I mean, like stuff related to children is going to be a really big one. Stuff related to abortion is a massive one in the United States. LGBT issues can be a big one, but yeah, this is a mistake that I don't think they make the same mistakes anymore. But political pundits or political pollsters and politicians used to make the mistake that like, oh, poor people just care about meat and potatoes issues. They don't care about social issues. But that's absolutely not true. Sometimes poor people care about social issues more than wealthier people because they've got less of a stake even in kind of the whole like wealth game. I would argue actually, I was just on that topic even for Brexit. I feel like Brexit was largely driven by social issues, especially immigration. I think, even though some people try to talk around and say it was financial or say it was economic.
Very few people have a coherent ideology, all right? Very few people care deeply about politics, whether they're rich or they're poor. We're talking about a tiny percentage of the population, like 2-3% of the population.
It doesn't feel that way. I don't think so. When I look at the rhetoric and I look at the sentiment that was driving Brexit actually happening.
Yeah, that's true. That's true enough.
Yeah, it's true. And he's applying it to Brexit, but you could apply it to global warming, and it just shows like how freaking shallow Constantine's analysis is. A bit of a random attack on Constantine or Jordan Peterson, but that's fine. Why not? And the last one as well to illustrate that he isn't just like an edgelord. I mean, we heard him talk about Biden, we heard him talk about a whole bunch of things, but like here's him talking about sex differences and gender and those kind of issues, right? A hot button topic. But
I think it's important to recognize differences between men and women. They're real. They exist, obviously. There's different ways that men and women function in society. But I think that sometimes we make the mistake in society of we'll look at men and women where they are, and we'll assume that they can only ever be there because of our biological differences, and then we ignore the massive social drivers that we have that push us deeper into those fields. So, like in my opinion, in a totally equitable world, totally equal, everybody has the same opportunity, same upbringing, blah blah blah. I think even in that world, you'd still see men and women choosing differently based on the profession. But you're not going to see like 90% of men and 10% of women in some areas. It's going to be like 55-45, or maybe a little bit larger, maybe a little bit smaller, depending on the area.
I'm largely sympathetic, but you would still find areas where you'd find 90% men or 90% women. All right, in kindergarten teaching, all right, that's going to be overwhelmingly, I would expect, a female profession.
But I feel like sometimes we make this mistake of like, well, women have always done this, and we'll never want to do this in the future. And I think that, at least in the United States, keep in mind when I speak, I'm always speaking U.S. social issues, so it might be slightly different across the world, but the United States, I think access to the workplace and access to birth control has like fundamentally altered women's relationship with society in ways that I don't think anybody would have ever believed.
Yeah, he threads the needle there. I think most visual people would have to admit that balances the the biological and cultural arguments there pretty well. And this is in response to what is kind of like a gotcha question. I think he was asked, how do you define a woman? What's a woman? And he gives an answer like that, which it's a good one. He answers it better than I think I could if I was put on that spot.
Yeah, and also the very last point there where we said, this is in reference to the US. Keep in mind, I'm always talking in relation to the US context, right? That's him doing the thing that so many of the gurus don't, whereas I mean, I'm not saying he always is this careful, but it speaks to his desire to, contextualize what he's claiming.
Yeah,
right?
like that's an important caveat, right? And it's something that wouldn't occur to most opinionators on that topic. No, I mean what it demonstrates is like we've heard Destiny being loose and we've heard him being careful, right? And I think the takeaway is that he contains multitudes. He can do a lot of different things, and he can operate at a very effective level. He can also operate at different levels. Yeah.
So that's where I think I'll end it with the clips. Maybe one very, very final one, which is just I think a true sentiment about, maybe the rationalists would do well to hit this point.
I expect communities to be irrational about the way that they evaluate what I say, because I don't expect communities to be logic-driven, ultra-rational things. It's just not how groups of people work. Not necessarily to its detriment. Sometimes it's good. When we're making decisions as a group or as a family or as a relationship, not everybody wants to sit down with fucking Wikipedia Andy and pull out a spreadsheet and map out like the best arguments for like why should we raise our kid this way or why should we do this, right? I totally understand that not everybody functions like that. That's fine. Totally get it. One of the problems that I run into, though.
So just talking about, the general, people are not rational beings, so it's understandable that he'll push people's buttons and whatnot. And anyway, he's going to go on and outline his thing. But I just thought that is he is modeling correctly people's psychology, right? And he's not viewing that everybody is like him. He kind of recognizes he's an outlier, and that's relevant. And just to reiterate, like the main themes for me with Destiny are that he is what he says. He is a edgy Twitch streamer.
Okay, that'll do it for now. I'll be back. I expect in 90 minutes, I'm going to talk to Ronnie Goldman, decoding the campus pro-Palestine, anti-Israel protests.